All right, we're about to start. Please find a seat. We have still some empty seats here, so you can choose. Okay, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's edition of Hanating. A direct translation to English would be something like Hana Court. But in this court there are no prosecutors, there are no defendants, no judges, only equal witnesses to the messy world we live in right now. As this is the first time Hanating is arranged with both Finland and Sweden in NATO, it was no rocket science to formulate the headline, the theme for this seminar, Finland and Sweden together in NATO. It's so beautiful, it's so true, and it's so important. Just a couple of weeks ago we learned that Sweden will take responsibility for the NATO FLF, Forward Land Forces base, to be established in the northern Finland. And not very far away, Norway is considering to build a fence along its northern border with Russia, obviously inspired by Finland, who is doing exactly the same. These are two kind of odd observations, and at the same time facts of life illustrating the present situation in the world we're living right now. But in the famous big picture, what is expected from Finland and Sweden in NATO? And what can we do as members, not only as 2 but 5 Nordic countries within NATO? And what does it mean when NATO's borderline with an aggressive and expansive Russia has doubled, a border that is now closed, by the way? We are soon about to find out, so please connect your seatbelts. My name is Stefan, Wallin. I will be your moderator here today. But first, I will give the word to Gunvor Kronman, who is the CEO of Hanaholmen. Gunvor, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, dear members of the Finnish and the Swedish parliaments, and dear friends of Finland and Sweden and wider Nordic and Baltic cooperation. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this year's Hanating, where, as Stefan was just explaining, the theme is Finland and Sweden together in NATO. This meeting of our defense committees has become an annual tradition that we cherish very much here at Hanaholmen. And just coming out of the bilateral meeting between our two committees, I can just testify that the friendship, the sincerity, and the willingness to go forward is really broad and very, very eager in both countries. It was such a pleasure to follow the meeting this morning. Personal meetings do create trust, and trust capital helps us really come to difficult decisions. I believe that this kind of continuous dialogue where you get to know each other, where you spend time together, and where you learn about each other's realities, these things do help us also becoming good partners in the new NATO partnership that we are now entering. Russia's aggression against Ukraine began in the spring 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea, as we know, and in February 22, Russia then launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine with the goal of quickly capturing the country and replacing its leadership. Fortunately, that did not happen. Everyone remembers Ukrainian President Zelensky's famous words to the Americans, "I need ammunition, not a ride." And ammunition is something that was also discussed this morning. With its brave defense efforts, Ukraine has made its mark in history. Russia's war of aggression has been a very brutal one, with Russia clearly violating laws of war time and time again. Civilian targets such as hospitals, apartment buildings, and energy facilities in Ukraine have been deliberately attacked. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River is one of the greatest environmental disasters of our time. On the military side, the use of drones and signal intelligence via satellite systems has characterized the war. This year's Hanating begins with the military experts reflecting on the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine from a Swedish and a Finnish perspective, a truly important learning session. We will then broaden the perspective with comments from defense and security policy experts. In the second half of the program, we will discuss how the bilateral Swedish-Finnish defense cooperation is developing within a NATO framework and what Finland and Sweden can contribute together to the collective defense. According to analysts, the Finnish-Swedish defense cooperation is an important contribution to NATO's Article 3 provisions on national defense capability, which states the parties separately and jointly by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. The military competencies of Finland and Sweden do complement each other, reinforcing their national defenses as well as the collective strength of the alliance. The recent announcement that Sweden is taking responsibility for leading NATO troops in Finland is a strong declaration of intent, clearly showing how committed Sweden is to Finland's security. Finland and Sweden share a mutual understanding of our region and its unique characteristics, as well as Russia as a threat. It's important to maintain a high level of trust and a common situational awareness, both in civilian and military areas. I'm really convinced that today's discussions again at this Hanating will further strengthen the bonds between our countries. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunvor. Well, what have we learned from the war in Ukraine? That is the question. And we will now hear two keynotes, one from Kari Nisula, who's Deputy Chief of Staff of the Finnish Defence Command, and then Jens Nykvist, who is Deputy Head of Defence Headquarters in Sweden. And after the presentations, we will hear some comments from a distinguished quartet. But first I will give the word and the floor to Kari Nisula, please.
Members of Parliament and ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and absolutely a privilege to be here today and share ideas and thoughts about Russian invasion to Ukraine and things what we have learned from the war in Ukraine from Finnish military perspective. Yesterday when I was listening to the discussion during dinner, I was thinking that human history is a history of war. And it's hard to find any new perspective when looking, for example, 2,000 years, last years of that history. Of course, time is different, technology is different, trends of war are different, but most of the things are those we are familiar with and seen hundreds of times. Sometimes we just don't remember these historical lessons. You all know issue very well, but I have to start with a famous phrase which says that the first casualty when war comes is the truth. What I mean is that over 2.5 years of brutal war, there are a huge amount of lessons from Ukrainian front in different level, technical, tactical, operational, and strategical level of incidents, information, and analysis. We have to fully utilize and implement all valuable lessons that are appropriate, but at the same time consider carefully how these lessons in Ukrainian environment are compatible with our operational environment, threat, climate, and way of defense. I start with attrition war. We thought it's already history, but it's not the case, I think, not really. Large scale, high intensity, and long war is still an essential part of the Russian toolbox to solve out political issues. It's not only a war between military capabilities, it's a war against nation. In addition to military targets, the war is everyone's business from the very first moment. Long-range fires and effects covers the whole society and civilian infrastructure and around the whole country and world. This means that the whole nation, not only military, but the whole society must be prepared in appropriate level. Easy to say, I know, hard to rationalize, and hard to put into practice, and relatively expensive, I think. Russians, they are able to take significant strategic and operational risks when trying to achieve regional, political, and military objectives. And they do have significant force protection capability. We have seen in Ukraine, it's not just about capability, but also capacity to continue to fight attrition warfare with enormous losses. We thought it's already historical thing. Basically, these type of wars of attrition are won by economies, enabling massive quantities, for example, drones, artillery ammunition, armored vehicles, and other combat equipment. High technological weapons in Western countries, they are effective, but they are difficult or complex and very slow to manufacture. These weapons also require well-trained soldiers, and it takes significant time to train those soldiers. Achieving sufficient number of military mass is difficult for higher-end Western economies, where decisions are usually made 2 years behind. On the battlefield, legacy still matters if you have one, and especially if you don't. And there is still room and place for old conventional weapons like anti-tank missiles, mortars, and artillery. And I think that today's first-person view attack drones will be future's old combat equipment quite soon. But evolution of singular equipment is fast one. So we must have a balance between high and low technological forces and weapons. Our battle is not based on mass, but we must be able to sustain our battle in sufficient level. What helps us in Finland is that we have maintained relatively large conventional warfighting capabilities and procured some high-level spearhead technologies like long-range fires capabilities. Large trained reserve is one essential model in Finnish defense forces that is really needed. Within decades, we have maintained our comprehensive approach to defense, military structures, and conventional warfighting capabilities, and being prepared to face Russian large-scale military invasion against Finland. Looking for European terror like right now, I think it has been a right solution. But there is still a lot to be done. Next, I will highlight a couple of insights from this huge field of lessons learned, and I know my Swedish colleague will highlight and elaborate more of these. Sufficient range of the different sensors and weapon systems is essential. It gives you a certain freedom of operations and denies that from enemy. You can also use a asymmetric way to deny Russian freedom of operation. One example of that is a Ukrainian Navy battle in Black Sea region, where overwhelming Russian Navy have taken serious casualties, and they don't really have freedom of navigation. Kill chain in today's battlefield is effective and fast one, not only with satellite and long-range intel capabilities, but especially UAVs and drones at every level, which means that you are detected immediately when you are doing something. So you have to fortify, you have to cover, or you have to move, disperse, and use decoys and false targets if you want to live. One phrase is, if you emit, you will be hit. Tells that it's the rule in all domains. How used we are to that today, for example, when using mobile phones in everyday life. Transparency in the battlefield is related to the same issue. If you do something, you will be spotted. If something happens, it will be available via internet before your military report is delivered. It is part of forming a common operational picture and awareness what is happening around you. This transparency gives you a proper tool for information warfare, but it's definitely a challenge to maintain operational security. New technology and new methods of use your capabilities give you advantage, but in operational level, it seems to be that they are not quick game changers with overwhelming superiority. Fast adaptation and finding appropriate countermeasures against enemy actions seems to be an essential part of success on the battlefield. With these, you might not win, but it might prevent you to lose. Innovative and creative use of all available ways and means, like civilian application in your mobile phones, is crucial. Success on the battlefield requires ability to learn fast and deliver that learning quickly to entire your army and defense forces. Technology-wise, there are a lot of important areas to be involved with all, and there will be continuous need for short-term research, development, and innovation. There is an urgent requirement for short-time delivery of capabilities needed for the fight. The obvious one, which everyone is talking about, is autonomous systems and robotics. Not only air, also land and sea domains. What is ability to identify friend or foe, and to have situational awareness? Absolutely vital thing is the electric warfare capabilities in all services in different levels. Dual use of technology, ability to use ready available technology in the field, and the old thing since the Roman Empire, personal equipment for the soldiers in fights. Constant need to improve and evaluate. What is your protection level in your body? What is your protection level in hearing? What is your protection level in sight? How you are able to maneuver with all this protection? How do you evacuate the persons when they are wounded or dead? They are still key elements for the fights. One challenge is that war is difficult to predict. During spring 22, I think many expected a quick Russian victory, and just a year after that, there were great expectations related to Ukrainian summer offensive. Both estimations proved to be in the wrong direction. So we should believe what we are doing, but not an over-optimistic way. The optimistic promise of a short war is something that we obviously should avoid. The great value of bilateral cooperation like FISE, Finnish-Swedish cooperation, or multilateral cooperation between countries like Nordefco is something that we should not underestimate, even we are all members of NATO alliance. With this cooperation in military-wise, we ensure common situational awareness and alignment of local and regional operational activities starting already from peacetime. For me, the most important lessons learned is that a strong will to defend your country is still the most valuable thing. The most advanced weapon systems are worth of nothing if you don't have well-motivated soldiers who is willing and able to fulfill tasks in the brutal condition of war. Thank you.
Thank you, General Nisula, for your interesting remarks. And now, Jens Nykvist, please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Your Excellencies, members of Parliament, organizers, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure of being here, trying to, should I say, give some of our lessons learned from the war in Ukraine, and also as a compliment and just what Kari just mentioned, because I totally agree with everything he said in there. But I would give, well, maybe some other perspectives as well, hopefully, for it. I think an important part is that we need to have two thoughts in our head. It's here and now, and it's also in the future, because we need to fight what we with the things that we have today. That's very important, and we need to adapt in a very high tempo. But also, we need to think in the future and what is to plan for. And of course, lessons learned from the war in Ukraine is one part of that. The report we have written to the Parliament is part of a broad effort from several government agencies for the upcoming defense bill here in December as well. Next, please. Total defense. That's a key, because this is not a military problem. It's a whole of society issue. It's the total defense that needs to be capable to cope with what is happening. Regarding deterrence, civil, military, everything, and I will come back to that. Kari just mentioned as well the will of the people. I would say one part from the Ukrainian war and is the Stratcom, the strategic communication part, where really a big emphasis of keeping the will of the people that they will continue to fight, and also the will of the Western nations to continue with all the support. That's two important parts. So what is new and what is the challenge? I would say, and Kari also mentioned it, of course, transparency. The battlefield transparency. You can't hide. Everyone is a player. Everyone is a target in that way. Because it is very, very hard today to hide yourself in the battlefield. The operational tempo, the command and control is essential, that we keep the pace. And to do that, be able to do that, it calls for layers of air defense, force protection, early warning systems, and tactical ISR. Electronic warfare was mentioned. That's a key part, really, to cope with and be able to use electronic warfare and signal intelligence in the best of ways, because when you communicate, you will be discovered and someone will harm you in the worst of ways. So that's very important, but it's one thing to discover it. You need to have the capability to use that information as well in your own system, to disperse, to hide, to do something against the opponent. So that's very important. So that's the operational tempo and the C2. There needs to be a balance between information access and information security, because if we keep everything secret, it's going to be secret. We need to find the solution of when is it secret enough, or when it's not secret anymore, because as mentioned as well, it will be on the internet, it will be in some other system. And looking into what the Ukrainian Ukrainians has managed to do with the C2 and using civilian technology together with the military technology, it's very, very impressive, and we have a lot to learn in that way. Next one, please. Some conclusions. Embrace change, but stay skeptic, because everything that we see today might be the old systems that are being used tomorrow. But we need to embrace the change because the pace is very, very high. It's very important that we test, evaluate, and take the lessons learned really to be able to use everything in our own systems. But to remember, don't invest in just one thing. Maybe at the moment it's drones, very, very important part. But there's always countermeasures being developed towards certain systems. So you need to have this broad palette of systems and the layered defense that is necessary. There are no silver bullets. Wars can be different. Different periods in the wars will be different, and how to be able to handle that. The operational tempo that I mentioned, it's regarding the kill chain. How fast can we act towards the opponent? That's something we really need to work with all the time, to use all measures that we have available. Evolution will occur uneven. What I mean with that is that, for instance, if we look at the space domain right now, it's a force multiplier in a very good way to use systems that is possible to put in space. One example is, should we say, Starlink, and how the Ukrainians have managed to use that system to their benefit. Civil-military cooperation, it's essential. But I must say also regarding operational tempo, to maintain a high operational tempo requires innovation, quick decision-making, and the integration of new technologies like AI. And that's something that we need to be able to cope with the new technology. Will we embrace it? Is it okay to put in our systems? How much trust will we put into it in the military systems, for instance? But that's a key if we want to increase the tempo. And today, with all the sensors that are capable of handling so much data, we need the tools really to be able to use that in the best of ways. Cyber, of course, is also one thing. But if we go to the civil-military integration, the use of civilian communication technologies such as 4G, 5G, and cloud-based systems, it really highlights the importance of balancing accessibility with security in military communications and vice versa. Digitalization, of course, and also the possibility to be able to hide. Today, I think we see that large formations is very hard to hide, so you need to move in smaller formation. Is that the future? I don't know. But you need to be able to look into this and see how to handle the battlefield. With a lot of creativity, of course, that needs to be not stopped. It needs to be used in the best of ways. Next, please. The future warfare. And here I put cheap and plenty versus advanced and few, for example. It's not versus. I would say it's something that needs to be together. The multi-domain operations, with the main idea is to orchestrate all the military activities in all domains with non-military activities that is happening. Civ, mil, that needs to be put together. We need the new technology to be able to master the MDO concept because this is a fast pace for it. It required the future warfare, require multi-domain operations that combine various military capabilities across land, air, sea, cyber, and space. Effective leadership and decentralized decision-making are essential as well. Digitalization and smart tools are the vital enablers for it. Cheap and plenty, of course, but we have the advanced and few as well. I think it's a combination of both that is necessary. Kinetic and cognitive, definitely both, that you need to go into the mindset, as well as having the capability for kinetic warfare. Direct versus indirect, civilian versus military, it's definitely together. Human versus autonomous systems, the combination is already here, but it's something that we foresee that will come even more. Proxy versus state actors, transparency versus surprise. And the cultural shift for it, I think is, well, it's for us, it's for everybody. It's, well, if I'm talking from the military side, the success in future conflicts will not only be driven by technology, but also by the cultural shift within the military, emphasizing adaptability, creativity, and decentralized command structures, how we work. We need to work different, or we need to work as we do, but maybe in a faster pace in some way. So the methods need to be looked into. Demands of leadership as well, and command and control ability. That's some of the parts of that. Military, academia, and industry. I put that as a triangle. I think it should be a fast circle instead that spins very, very fast, because that needs to be really embraced, and we need to be able to work together for that way. It's in Sweden, it's a lot of things happening in that, should we say, domain or in that work, but it's still a lot of work that needs to be done to be able to procure material much faster, etc., etc. And the cultural shift, it's not, well, it's, I can just look into my own organization, because with all the regulations and everything that we have put in place during the, should we say, strategic timeout, that needs to be turned down in a safe way, because not everything was bad or is bad, but there are some parts that we really can change for that. My last bullet really is that we can take the next one. Thank you. As mentioned, there are no short wars. This war will last for a long time, most likely, and something that we need to work with is really how to be able, in a long war, how to be able to replenish, how to build new forces, etc., and look into that process to continue to build while at war. That's very important. That's, of course, not only the military part, it's for everybody in all domains for it to continue this long war. And I think that was my last part. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Embrace change, but stay skeptic. The first victim when the war starts is the truth. Some very important remarks, and now we will hear some comments to those remarks, but also maybe comments in general. And I would like to invite our 4 experts to the scene. I will present them one by one. The first one is Helin. Please. He's project lead, Tilannekartta OSINT. He's a fact checker, intelligence analyst, journalist, expert on Russian invasion of Ukraine. Please. Hannu Himanen, who is a veteran diplomat, well known in Finnish public debate. He also served as Finnish ambassador to Moscow between 2012 and 2016. Kronhamn, who is head of unit at the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, MSB. Please. And Kristi Raik, who is Deputy Director of the International Center of Defense and Security in Estonia, please. All right, and to start with, I've asked each of you to give about 5-minute comment to what we just heard, and also, of course, from what you have on your mind. And I think it's a lot of things that you have on your mind, knowing you and your insights. Maybe we'll start with the lady. Kristi, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here, and thank you to the speakers. When I was listening to the speeches, I thought here we are really talking about war as something that is close and something that may reach us. And this is not the sense I necessarily get when I go to seminars across Europe, in other NATO allies who are further away from Ukraine, further away from Russia. So this is really my first comment, that we are in the third year of full-scale war in Ukraine now. There is no end in sight. Nobody knows how the war will end. It can go either way. It is still possible, I believe, for Ukraine to win, but it can also end with some sort of defeat. Although I must say also what we have learned in this war is that Ukraine is a very strong nation. It is amazingly strong. And that's one issue where we all have a lot to think about. What is it that has made Ukraine surprisingly strong in persisting against an aggressor like Russia? And we did not kind of think prior to the war that Ukraine would be so capable. I think it came as a surprise to many. And we have seen that, of course, to persist in such a war, you need military resources, capabilities. This is something that Ukraine has been getting from its Western supporters. Never quite enough, but still in an increasing quantity. And also something that Ukraine has started to produce itself amazingly fast in an increasing quantity. But then what you also need is will to defend, and this is something that also came very strongly in the speeches. And in Finland, there is no need really to emphasize how important it is. There is no need to emphasize in Estonia how important it is. We know that our ability to be secure and to be able to defend ourselves really starts from every person and from our society, from the will of our citizens to defend their country. And this is also what we have seen in an amazing quantity in the case of Ukraine. When President Zelensky visited Tallinn in January this year, this is what he emphasized. He was even wearing a sweatshirt with the word kaitsetahe, which is will to defend in Estonian. But then he also spoke about will to win, that it is not enough to have will to defend, but you also need to have will to win. And this is yet another element in this ongoing war, where we have seen this will on the side of Ukraine, and I think here we understand how existential it is for the future of European security order that Ukraine should win this war. But when we look at the collective Western position, we rather see strategic hesitation and strategic weakness. I'm sure this is how Russia is reading the Western support to Ukraine. There is this hesitation. And of course you may argue that, well, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and of course that makes a lot of difference. So we are in a different position. And yet this is one of the factors that makes me most uneasy about the Western support to Ukraine, that we see quite impressive quantities of assistance, but always with delays and with limitations. And this really has to do with strategic thinking. It is somewhere very deep in the Western understanding about the relationship between the West and Russia, the US and Russia, the thinking about strategic stability that dates back to the Cold War era, and that has its impact now in the form of the United States and some other allies putting limitations to their assistance to Ukraine and really having this hesitation. And this is something that we also need to learn from. So in NATO, we are part of the collective defense. And as I said, it makes a whole lot of a difference. And NATO is about collective defense, but at the same time, it is also about the strength of each of the allies. And this is also something I think we know very well in the frontline countries, that we cannot rely on this collective defense too much, that in the end we need to have our own will to defend, our own will to win. We need to have our resources. Of course, we need to have our allies and very strong relations with our allies. We need to invest in collective defense. So it's about all of us together. And it's about resources which we don't have enough. And again, coming back to where I started, in the discussions in capitals of many of our Western allies, yes, there is talk about Russia as a long-term threat. Yes, it is in the EU and NATO strategic documents now stated very clearly that Russia is the most serious long-term threat to European security. But when we look at actions in actually strengthening military capability, strengthening NATO's collective defense, putting in place the new defense plans and actually being able to implement them, we are not seeing fast enough progress. So we need to continue working on the resources, the military capabilities, the kind of very material side of it at the national level and collectively, but then also we need to continue this work of strategic debate and strengthening this common understanding about what is the nature of the threat that we are facing, and kind of strengthening further this understanding that the war in Ukraine continues. It's about security of all of us, and the possibility that it will spread is actually very real, and it is up to our collective effort to prevent it from spreading and to stop it in Ukraine with the victory of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristi. Jim, or Jim. Jim is the English version. Jim is the Swedish one.
That's correct. Well, thank you for having me here today. It's an honor. I am going to say a few things that are that adds to what's been said already, as I have the perspective of the civilian society and civil defense. So what we do in Sweden to try to support our armed forces, to keep our population safe, to upkeep essential services to a degree as much as we can, and to support and promote the willingness to defend, as many has mentioned before. And in Sweden, many organizations are interested in doing this work now, interested in learning from Ukraine. And it's important to bear in mind that when we think about the civilian society, it's pretty much everything else but the armed forces, and there's so many different aspects of that. So when my team has done a study that we handed into the government in June this year, we covered a very broad base. It's difficult to summarize, but I'll give a few examples of the lessons that we try to learn from the war in Ukraine. And I'm going to try to come into a few broad conclusions towards the end, all within 5 minutes. So strap yourselves in. So we've learned that, and it's been said before as well, that Russia doesn't respect international humanitarian law. It's obvious that Russia targets civil infrastructure and civilians. And this is something that we need to bear in mind and have as a planning assumption when we build our civil defense. protected symbols, legally protected symbols such as the Red Cross and civil protection triangles, etc. We need to consider carefully how we use them because they might end up being targets rather than protecting us. We have learned that bomb shelters that are used in peacetime situations for other purposes are often better kept than the ones that are not. And more usable as bomb shelters as well. We have learned that, previous speakers has mentioned as well, that Ukrainians have been good at retooling commercial applications for smartphones in order to use them for crisis and risk communication towards the public, and also using publicly available communication applications for coordination purposes when speed and clarity has to be prioritized over confidentiality. We have learned that internal migration in war can create staff shortages for upkeeping essential services. So where people move from, it's difficult to upkeep essential services, and where people move to, it's a challenge to give enough service for the people that amass. We have learned that the Ukrainians have used points of invincibility in a clever way along evacuation routes, migration routes, in order to facilitate complex evacuation. We have learned that a drawn-out war that we've seen in Ukraine has created evolving challenges. So, for example, in the healthcare system, early on in the war, they needed to build a capability when it came to war wounds, whereas as the war moves on, different challenges arises for the healthcare system. For example, there's a surge in mental health issues that needs to be, the healthcare services need to realign in order to be able to deal with. Tragically, we've learned that wearing ID tags facilitates identification in handling of mass graves. We've learned that the importance of childcare in wartime is very important. Rescue operators, repair crews, nurses, they will hesitate to go to work if they don't know that their children are being looked after. So many examples that sort of takes us everywhere in society, and I'll try to come into a few more broader conclusions. And the first one being we need to have a sense of urgency when it comes to building civil defense in our countries. When we speak to our friends in Ukraine about their experiences, they show us that there were a lot of things that they managed to plan ahead and put in place. They had, for example, laws that made it possible for them to move data out from the country, to safeguard it and make it available in other countries in case the occupation would end up in a different way that it did. They had prepared secure control centers for critical infrastructure so that they could take it in use in the early phase of the war. And they had kept strategic reserves in different sectors, for example, in the transport industry with diesel trains, etc. But they also highlight there are many things that they weren't able to prepare, that they hadn't prepared. And especially when it comes to planning of communication in the early phases of the war, when a lot of people needed to move from the front to other places. And when it comes to fortifying and diversifying different civilian infrastructures. And what they tell us is that please go home and learn from us. Don't wait. You don't know when the war is going to be with you. So they're very generous in sharing experiences, and we're grateful for that. A second broad conclusion is the importance to continue supporting Ukraine. We not only on the military side, but on the civilian side, Sweden via MSB has supported with education, experts, medical evacuation, big amounts of donated material for energy sector, the healthcare sector, and the emergency management sector, amongst others. And this is very appreciated and crucial. The international support on the civilian side is crucial for maintaining and upkeeping essential services in Ukraine, and it's paramount that we continue doing that. A final broad conclusion is when we look at the lessons from Ukraine when it comes to the civil perspective, it actually looks like if you compare the roadmap set out by the Swedish Defense Commission that's gonna be codified in a defense bill very soon. It does look like we are on the right track. Many of the lessons actually are covered or targeted looking ahead. So we look forward to continue working with strengthening the Swedish civil defense in the coming years based on this defense bill. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jim. And the defense bill will obviously be launched next week, as we know, for now. Okay, now it's time for our fact checker. Hopefully we're all fact checkers in our daily life, but Jon is our official fact checker today, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm also very honored to be here. I am also going to add to what has been said so far, and I am going to comment on what our team as an NGO has seen and learned of this war, especially about the information space and the emerging capabilities of the nations fighting this war. As General Nisula and Admiral Nykvist said, this war offers lessons both old and new. We are reminded of the traditional military power, manpower, material, and the importance of firepower. We can all see this online every day. And both sides have struggled with these traditional military strengths throughout this war. Ukraine, especially when the Western aid has become deadlocked. But then we have the new front, where we have drones, we have smartphones, we have satellites, which we are using footage and data from all of these every day in our work following this war. And often here in the West, it does feel like we are behind our adversaries. We are behind our allies, be that Russia, be that Ukraine, in the use of these emerging capabilities, except maybe for satellite imagery. There is an ongoing democratization of capabilities. Ukraine's use of inexpensive drones to strike deep into Russian territory and supplant the lack of cruise missiles shows that military capabilities once reserved for state powers or that have never been seen before are soon available for everyone, even non-state actors. And it's not going to stay within the confines of Ukraine. This is a genie that cannot be put back into the bottle and that we all must be prepared for in the future. Meanwhile, we are fighting an increasingly participative war. Smartphones are blurring the lines between the battlefield and the home front. We have real-time footage from these conflict zones, which can be shared online, and that creates new security risks, and it also makes it impossible for us to fully control the narratives about the wars we are fighting. Civilians and soldiers both post footage online that can and will, and it has been used for kinetic and psychological targeting. And narratives and public perceptions can be easily manipulated and shaped through open social media platforms. As Admiral Nykvist said, civil-military cooperation has become essential. When military communications fail, we time and time again see soldiers fall back on the ways of communication that they use at home. Civilian platforms such as text messaging, WhatsApp, Discord, Google Meets, Signal, are used extensively to wage this war in ways that they weren't intended for, and they have become essential for many of the units on the front lines. When internet is lost on the battlefield, operations can be paralyzed. As the Admiral said, how do we balance this need for access and this need for very sort of common platforms with the need for military security? Meanwhile, independent groups, independent actors such as our team can analyze this war in ways that were not possible before. We have open sources, we have commercial satellite imagery, we even have direct contacts with the soldiers on the front lines and also in the rear. Groups like ours and the online communities that emerge around these groups can at times have a more coherent understanding of the realities of the battlefield than more traditional researchers do. But that also means that these independent groups can shape narratives in their own ways, adding into the information space, both strengthening our national capabilities, but they can also be very, very disruptive if these groups are not acting in good faith. These are just few of the ways that this modern interconnected society bleeds together with the modern battle space and this modern version of war. And what it means is that we must consider how to fight not just the physical war, but the informational war in a way that we haven't had to consider before. While we must still remember that the military success on the battlefield is dependent on the capabilities of the individual soldiers in those trenches. So, just to conclude my little speech, while the war in Ukraine has reminded us that these traditional military capabilities and needs haven't gone anywhere, and they remain essential, Ukraine has also shown us that this border between the battlefield and the home front has become completely blurred, and the ways of participating in these conflicts is evolving rapidly. We need to prepare for this, and we must adapt for these changes. And we must understand what they mean in our own Nordic context, because these lessons cannot be directly lifted from Ukraine into this world of ours. We are a very different sort of a society. We have a very different sort of a trust in our institutions. But understanding this is crucial for both Finland and for Sweden and all of NATO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. And now, Hannu Himanen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and for my part also thank you for the invitation to the panel. Very interesting points by the senior military and my fellow panelists. I think it was General Nisula who said that we have to be prepared for a long war. Now, I have already some time ago started thinking about, because I think this is generally accepted, that the war unfortunately may be longer than any one of us would wish. But how long is long? From the Finnish perspective, the winter war lasted 105 days. The continuation war, 41-44, lasted 3 years and 2 months, roughly. And now we're looking at the Ukraine war without any, at the moment, any perspective of finishing it soon. This disturbs me thoroughly in many ways. But then what have we learned from the war so far? From the general political Western perspective, I think we have learned much less than we should have. We are slow learners, we lack strategy, we lack perspective. And still, I think what is important to note is that the West has engaged in hopeless, wishful thinking about Russia ever since the Soviet Union collapsed. And we seem to be in difficulties in getting rid of that mode of thinking. Another point is that because of our, as I said, lack of strategy, even after the initial determined and unified reaction by the West to the Russian invasion, we have seen a gradual disintegration of this political will. And by hesitating, we are actually encouraging Russia to continue what it's doing. Putin, I believe, believes that whatever effort Russia needs to put into this war, he can outlast the West, unfortunately. Jim said that we have seen disregard of international humanitarian law and international law in general by Russia. I think this is partly to be blamed on us and our hesitancy in confronting and our slowness in reacting to Russian behavior, much before February 22. But there is then this famous quote, which usually is attributed to Bismarck, but there are other versions of it as well, that Russia is never as strong nor as weak as we think it is. But both underestimating and overestimating Russia in military and security terms is dangerous. So we have to find a balance. We have to be hard-headed realists when we look at Russia. And to understand Russia, we need people who really know Russia. And this is something, maybe my most important conclusion, if I just think of the lessons learned. At least from the Finnish perspective, we are, I think, in a very difficult spot, in a situation where we need more and better Russia expertise. The young generation has little or no incentive of becoming Russia experts. So how do we solve this problem? I'm not saying that we should be somehow understanding and forthcoming vis-à-vis Russia to make it more palatable. Not at all. We should not definitely demonize Russia. But how can we encourage young people to study Russian language and culture and the Russian society when there is a very bleak perspective of getting employed? Business will not be revived in many, many years. I don't think so. So we'll have to think about that. And then finally, my final point is has to do with the gray area, and particularly the way we have been coping and can cope with the information space, particularly Russian information operations and influence operations. I think even though we in Finland particularly, we tend to be very content of ourselves, that we are resilient and we are able to cope with Russian propaganda and attempts to influence. But I think we are fooling ourselves. I think the Russian influence goes much deeper It is much more strategic and long-term than we believe, and it is much more subtle than we quite often see. The propaganda hides things that Russians are doing. They're using social media platforms very skillfully, and the problem of attribution will always be there. We don't know who really does things, but I think we have to brace ourselves and be much more resilient in the face of persistent Russian efforts to influence our societies, our political elites, and decisions politicians are faced with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannu, for interesting perspectives. You just heard a lot of questions, I guess, here also in your minds and our minds. Let me ask you, Jim, a question about the challenges we have faced in handling the crisis in our Nordic societies. We have valuable values, in fact, in place, like openness, transparency, respect for the rule of law. So, for instance, our municipalities had, up to some time ago, delivered on their websites information to potential house builders, entrepreneurs about where critical infrastructure is located in the municipalities area. For instance, electricity pipelines, data cables, other critical information. Important, of course, information for those who need to know it without any hidden agendas. But if you are an FSB agent and looking, you just have to click into the websites and find information that, if misused, can cause several damage. How shall we handle this balance between the openness, the open, transparent rule of law society in the Nordic countries, and not being blue-eyed fools?
It's a good question, and there is a difficult balance, and I don't know exactly where the line should be drawn there. But we do all have a responsibility to take this perspective. So I think, at least in Sweden, there's an obligation for local planning and local municipalities to consider the total defense aspects in pretty much everything you do. This has been in place for a long time, but we're not used to that, and the process of sort of adapting and starting to thinking in this way again takes time. But it's a very important area to continue working with, and I think the legislative frameworks are in place. So I think it has a lot to do with educating everyone involved at the municipality level, decision makers, public servants, when they carry out their everyday work. But the balance is difficult to strike. Absolutely. I don't think I have a better answer than that.
So it's also a matter of mindset.
I do think so, yeah.
It takes time. Let me ask you, Jon, the first victim when a war starts is the truth. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, said in the United Nations General Assembly last week, and this is a quote: "Russia always stands for truth, law, peace, and cooperation." End of quote. Why is Russia lying all the time to everybody?
Well, there are multiple reasons, I think. Partially, we must ask ourselves, who is Russia really talking to? Russia, of course, doesn't talk to us here in the West when they say things like Lavrov said in the UN. They are communicating both to their internal audience, but then, of course, to the global South that is sort of sitting on the fence of this war, and all of them haven't wanted to sort of choose sides for one reason or another. But Russia also lies because that is expected of them to a certain extent. Russians themselves know that their politicians lie, that their experts lie, but they think that everyone else lies as well, which of course makes our job very hard when they imagine that the Western media and the Western experts work just as the Russian media and the Russian experts do. That is, that we also lie, that we also maliciously try to twist the truth, and that the West is, for better or worse, maybe not as evil as the Russian government says, but it is still lying. So really, what else could Lavrov also say? Because you cannot go on the stage and just say, yes, we are standing for the eradication of sovereign nations. That is not something that you do in the UN. So most of that, maybe we should here in the West, we should maybe ignore much of those Russian statements that are not clearly aimed at us, or that are simply there to sort of shape narratives that don't really concern us anymore because we know better.
Hannu.
Yes, if I could add, I fully agree with Jon in everything he said. Russians are experts in Orwellian double talk. You can say things that are contradictory, and you can believe in things that are contradictory at the same time. And Russians learned their lesson during the Soviet times, and those lessons have not been forgotten. You know that your leaders are lying, but you still know that you need to believe what they are saying, because this is what is your role as the citizen. Lavrov, in statements like that, has, I think, three audiences. The first one, of course, is Russians. They need to hear this all the time. The second one is, the two other ones are external. First, countries of the global south, I don't like the term, but anyhow, non-European, non-Western countries, where this message is much better received. Just recently, earlier this year, I met with an old Indonesian contact, an acquaintance. I served as ambassador to Jakarta in the late 90s. I asked him about how the war in Ukraine and Russia looked like in Indonesia. And his point was interesting. He said, Russia is all over the place in Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. And the message goes through. It is well received. And I don't think we understand this. And yes, Russia is repeating blatant lies, but they are well received outside Europe. We have to think about that very seriously. The third audience is a small but important minority in Western countries. There is a small group also in this country who, for reasons of their own, I won't go into that, want to listen to Russia and take Russians for their word. Russia stands for international law, for peace and security and sovereignty of nations. When, for some people, when Foreign Minister Lavrov says things like that, they just take it at face value. I don't think there's much for us to do. We cannot influence these people. They have their right to think as they do. But there is a receptive, small but receptive audience also in the West.
I do think that your example of Indonesia really highlights how we cannot directly take lessons from this war without putting them into the national context in which we move. Here in the Nordic countries in the West, we are resilient to information operations, and we trust media, and we trust our politicians, and we trust that the West is on the side of good. But in the global South, third world, non-Europe, whatever we call it, that is not necessarily how it is, and these sort of social media influencing operations and this narrative shaping can easily have much larger effect than it does over here.
Thank you, Kristi.
Well, I think what this speech by Lavrov underscores is that the whole UN system is now in a weaker state than it probably ever was. And he can be there speaking on behalf of a country that undeniably is engaging in a war of aggression without any justified reason. And the world actually knows it. It's not that people or leaders in different countries across the world would not know it, but this is kind of secondary, because what we are going through is a very turbulent period in the global order, where there is a fight about who defines the rules. And we have contenders to the West who see that the West is weak. And although we are speaking about this war in Ukraine that we say is existential, we are not able to put an end to it. And we are not able to kind of defend our interests in this. So they see that this talk is hollow, and although the West has many elements of strength, somehow it is not able to mobilize them. So when I talk to experts from countries like India or South Africa, what I see is a mix of, on the one hand, bitterness towards the West, which is understandable because of their own historical relations, but then also a very cynical view on the world. And it is in the interest of these countries to sit on the fence, because nobody knows how this fight will end. And eventually they will have to look after their interests. And they don't know who will emerge as the stronger one in this fight, and whose rules will in the end dominate in the world. Will it be the rules defined in the UN Charter and in the OSCE documents and that we say we want to defend? Or will it be rules defined by countries such as China and Russia? So this really is a global fight. And then knowing what goes on exactly on the battlefield in Ukraine it matters, but I think in the global context, in the end, it matters amazingly little, that it's about so much bigger things. And in the end, we have learned in this war that if we want to defend rules, there are situations where we really need to have a lot of power and also will to use that power in order to defend these rules.
Right. We'll continue with you, Kristi, changing the subject. Both countries have a common borderline with Russia. And when non-Finns sometimes ask us if it isn't horrible to have this common border with our eastern neighbor, we used to say that it would be even more horrible if the border wasn't there. But still there is a border. What is the situation at the Narva River right now? The Finnish border is closed, as we know.
Well, no big news from the Narva River for the time being. Of course, Estonia is also very well prepared to close the border if need be. So if there is some kind of escalation and it is necessary to close, then it can be done instantly. But so far, the situation has been manageable, and there are advantages still in keeping the border open and allowing the people who need to travel to Russia for various reasons to do it. We know there are so many people living in Finland also who travel to Russia through the Narva border crossing. But of course, this is one of the tools that Russia potentially has if it wants to escalate somewhere. It has this whole range of hybrid instruments, and certainly creating an escalation on the border is one, and we have seen it in so many cases. So we have learned by now, and we will not be taken by surprise.
Right. Any questions from the audience? There is one, please. Arto Räty, tell us who you are.
I'm Arto Räty, yeah. Actually, I will try to go back to the original presentations. Excellent presentation, excellent comments. But let's go back to the root level again. And one comment which can be interpreted as a question, and then one question. My comment is that we see a lot of drone videos. We talk about drones. My argument is that we are not going to win the war with drones. The war has to be won with more traditional capabilities supported by drones. But that's not the key. We should not focus that much on those technical instruments on the battlefield. My question is about the resilience of the society, and especially goes to Kari. Jens mentioned a little bit, but Kari did not that much. And I think that one of the major issues for our society is in a war situation to survive is the cooperation between the defense and security industry and the civilian industry. And I think the defense forces in both countries need to take a new step forward and have much deeper cooperation with the industry as they have had earlier. Why earlier there was not that much cooperation in Finland? The reason was that we wanted to buy ready equipment, cheap equipment from the shelf. But what has happened in Ukraine is that 2 years ago they had 0 drones produced in Ukraine. Today, this year, the number will be 1.3 million drones produced in Ukraine by hundreds of small companies. Not major corporations, but small companies, which gives the agility and the capability to adapt in a much faster way than before. So what should we do in our defense? Should we move forward and change our policies when it comes to cooperation with the defense and security industry? Thank you.
Thank you. Would you, Kari, like to respond?
Yes, I do echo what you say about the drones. As we can see, it's an important, but it's not decisive factor because of the front line, as you know. There is no changes in the front line very fast. So it's not a game changer, but it's something that you have to learn to live and learn to use. And about the industrial side, it's obvious when we are in the same alliance, more and more deepened cooperation. For military, it means total interoperability of the material, cross-use of material, cross-use of ammunition, pre-storage of ammunition that can be used immediately, no matter who is dealing with that. And I do agree that something must be changed, but I'm not sure whether the change is only for the military purposes. There must be only change from the military industrial sides. I intend to think that if I want to buy a car, it's quite easy. If you have money, you pick up your model, you pick up your color, and everything that you want to have it. And then it takes 1.5 years and you have that one. But if you want to buy a weapon, so you have to develop, pay development costs, you have to think, you have to modify. It's not one size fits for all at this moment. For the climate purposes, different areas, etc., different model, different armies. So it's much more complex. The structure of the industry is different, and the basis is different, obvious, because the markets and the legacy is different. But I think the change must be in both sides together.
So something to think about next time when you go to the drone shop. Hannu, coming back to you, you spent 4 years in Moscow as ambassador You were there 2014 when Crimea happened, and you had observed Russian behavior for a long time. What is the biggest surprise for you, looking at how Russia is doing right now, mentally and also the battlefields, keeping in mind what you said about when you quoted Bismarck, or it could have been Churchill, we don't know. Russia is never as weak nor as strong as we think. What is the biggest surprise for you when Russia is concerned?
Frankly, I think the biggest surprise to me is that Russia launched this war. Because even though I remember very clearly, and I have written about this in my book that came out in April, that Putin came out in public in the beginning of December 21 with this proposal of the Treaty on Security Guarantees, which was an ultimatum to the West. At that point, I realized that, yes, this was an ultimatum, and it would mean that Finland and Sweden could not join NATO had the West taken it seriously. Now, obviously, the West, it was not meant to be taken seriously. It was an ultimatum, an excuse to the war. But I still, at that point, did not think that Russia would go to war. The point that I realized that the war is going to happen was Monday, the 21st of February, after Putin's speech. I thought that it would be in Russia's interest to maintain the military pressure that it had been building up all through the year, and keep it up and achieve what would be achievable at a reasonable cost. But for reasons that we can analyze and think about, this was not the path that Putin wanted to take. I think the main reason for that is that Russia's, Mr. Putin's objectives go way beyond Ukraine itself. It's not only, this war is not only about Ukraine, it is about the international order and Russia's place in the world, and that is why it is a high-risk game that Putin seems to be ready to engage in. We don't know how this is going to happen, but the risks are so high that Putin has definitely risked his own future and the future of the political system that he has built. We'll have to see.
Yeah. What is the end game in Putin's mind? Any ideas?
I think the best guide is the documents that Hannu just referred to, which Russia presented in December 2021, where we have the most explicit formulation of the Russian aims. And the aim, very shortly, is to restore Russian sphere of influence and to restore a system of security where Russia's right to a sphere of influence is somehow recognized by the West. And where exactly the borders of that sphere will lie, I think that is something where then it depends on how far Russia is allowed to go. There are no clear goals, I think, in the minds of anybody in Russia, really. They go as far as they can, and certainly Ukraine has a special place in this plan. I think that's the Russian understanding, that without controlling Ukraine, they can't really achieve much more. So that's what they are fighting for now. But if they achieve that, they will move further. And this is something we have been repeating, of course, many times during the past years.
Thank you. With these remarks, but with big question marks remaining, we will end this session. Thank you very much for your very valuable insights so far. This is the halftime whistle, in fact, because Well, there are no free lunches, as you know, so there is no lunch here, but we have some coffee, we have some pie, we have some fruits outside on the second floor over there. Please enjoy, but only for 30 minutes, because at 12 o'clock we will continue here. Thank you very much, panelists. All right, we're about to start. Beginning of the second half. Take your seats. Do we have any bell or something to wake people up outside? There goes the bell. Okie doke. Okay, the second half starts, and that means that we will now hear from our politicians. All right. Okay, we heard from our politicians, that is members of the defense committees in the Finnish and Swedish parliaments. And by the way, as Gunvor Kronman already told you, the committees had a joint meeting early this morning, and it was fruitful. As always, there was only one problem: time, not enough time to handle all the interesting issues. But of course, there are new possibilities to meet in the future. Now we will discuss what else than Finnish-Swedish cooperation within NATO. And I would like to invite the chairmen of the committees, the defense committees, Jukka Kopra from the Finnish parliament, and he's serving his fourth term in the parliament. He was elected the first time in 2011. And Peter Hultqvist, chairman of the Swedish committee since 2022, and previously 2011 to 14, after which he became defense minister for 8 years to come. Lars Wistedt, Swedish Democrats, vice chairman of the Swedish committee. He was elected to the parliament in 2022, and he's also a former military officer. That's right. Mikko Savola, unfortunately ill today, but he will be replaced by Tomi Immonen, who is representing the Finns party. He's also the chairman for the Finnish Parliament's NATO Parliamentarian Committee, and in this capacity he will take the seat right now. Welcome to the panel, and I've also asked you, each of you, to deliver some remarks, maybe 5 minutes or something like that, to start with, and then we'll have a discussion, maybe also some time for questions from the audience. But now we'll start with the MPs, and maybe this time the host country's defense committee will start. Jukka, please.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for the invitation to this event. It has been very overwhelming discussion during the morning. We had a good joint meeting in the morning, early morning, and then these previous panels and discussions were very interesting, and I was happy to listen these comments and speeches we were able to hear. Now that Finland and Sweden, as we are members of NATO, we shouldn't start talking about Finnish-Swedish cooperation as it's something new, because for decades our armies have been doing cooperation, mutual planning, and so forth. and our countries and nations have been cooperating, and so it's not a change in Finnish-Swedish relationship at the moment to be members of NATO. And as far as I know, what I've heard from our military side, the cooperation between Finland and Sweden has been seamless, very effective, and very sort of fruitful. And why is this possible? It's because we are nations that we know each other, we have mutual history, and I think that the main ingredient in this equation is that we have good trust to each other. So we trust each other as nations, and that's a good thing to build on this future cooperation too, so that we know that we can solve any problem we might have because we trust each other. So bases are good. Now, of course, the NATO membership, implementing it is a huge task for both countries. They are making NATO defense planning, or our armies are making defense planning, and our governments are planning different things. And there's lots of things to do, lots of legislative changes need to be done, lots of investments. Maybe Finland has a little bit head start in this because we have this conscription system, we have this large reserve system in place already, and you're building these capabilities at the moment in Sweden, and we will be happy to help you in that task. Recently in the news, and we also already had today some discussion about this FLF concept, considering the cooperation NATO between Finland and Sweden, which is the Forward Land Forces concept. And maybe if I open it up a little bit, what is it about? Because it's possible that not everybody has read everything about it and may wonder what is it about. So the FLF concept is first and foremost, it's meant for situation below Article 5. So it's sort of a way to build deterrence in situation when we are not in a war yet, or are maybe possibly under some sort of pressure. Now, if you imagine the situation at Ukrainian border during the fall of 21 and winter of 22, we saw that Russians were building up their forces on the border, 10,000, 30,000 troops, 50,000 troops, 100,000 troops eventually, and they were in battle formation over there. So, and when they were asked that, what will you do? Will you attack? They said, no, we will not attack. So maybe, what if this same thing happens on NATO's eastern border, in Finland's eastern border? For example, if Russia starts building up troops and capabilities right to the border and putting them in attack positions. So we have to have to counterbalance this, or have a counterweight for this. And that's why we need these, we need to put troops in positions on the Finnish side, on the NATO side, in Lapland, wherever this might occur, so that to be ready for a possible attack. And if you consider the Finnish model of defense, our reserve system, this would mean that Finnish reservists would have to be called on duty from their regular daily jobs, and this would, if this pressurized situation would last for months, it would create a tremendous financial burden, for example, for Finnish society. And this is one key point where we as allies can work together to sort of level up the burden it creates to our members of alliance, and especially to Finland. And that's where you, Sweden, may come to step in if you wish to do so. And now that we have agreed that Sweden would be the framework nation for this FLF concept, it will be a way to start to preparing for these sort of situations. And this would mean that for example, in the start we have been talking, or Peter has talked about 10, 20 officers in Finland. Okay, that's just a way to start this thing. But as far as we see it, there's no sort of upper limit on this amount of troops that would be of use and needed in this kind of situation. Now, Stefan talked about a military base. I have to underscore that no minister or government official has mentioned establishing military base in Finland. Instead, the idea is that these foreign troops would sort of come and go to practice in Finland, and no sort of they would have sort of areas of responsibility. They would probably be there practicing and then go back to their home. Now, if we come back to the idea that this pressurized situation and force buildup along the Finnish border on the other side is emerging, how many troops would we need here? Actually, we would need as much as possible. So this would be need, from my opinion, that, for example, one brigade, as in some sort of plans, this has been mentioned, is bare minimum for this. And be it Swedish made or maybe there are other countries within that brigade too, it will be known during the course of time, but definitely this constellation of forces is the minimum from my point of view that is needed. But if the situation gets even worse and worse, and if it starts leading to possible Article 5 situation that there's going to be a war, I'd say that all land forces or all capabilities Sweden has should be deployable to Finland in those cases. I'm not saying that they should come here to start living here, but they should be able to come here quickly, do their operations here quickly, and be able to operate in the Finnish circumstances. Now, and then when we discuss about which countries could cooperate in this kind of operations or this kind of framework, I welcome everybody, but also we have to keep in mind the special circumstances in the Nordic countries, especially in the Lapland. In winter time, can be minus 30 degrees. You have to be capable of fighting in minus 30 degrees of weather, in snow and so forth. There are not many countries in the world who are able to produce troops to fight in this kind of circumstances. Nordic countries, Canada, US, that's about it. So maybe we should look these allies as members and possible cooperatives in this constellation. And that is the sort of idea from my point. I have to remind you, this is my personal idea and personal thinking, but that is sort of the position I see it at the moment, that we should start examining and developing this FLF concept together. Now, I think, did I use my time up already? Should I? Well, maybe just a couple words about the defense industry. This war, as we heard already here, is going to last for a long time. Russia has no drivers to seek for peace. They are slowly gaining in the war. They have their military industrial complex in full steam. They are producing more ammunition, more gear to the battlefield than they lose over there. So from Russian point of view, there's no sense seeking for peace, but the ongoing war, as it goes like this, is a desirable solution from Putin's point of view. So we have to counteract for this, and therefore this sort of Kristi Raik said about this Western hesitation, or what was the term she used. I think it was right to the point. We need to ramp up our defense industrial capabilities even more than we have done so far. And we need to fulfill our warehouses. We need to develop methods of support for Ukraine so that they can counterbalance the Russian aggression and push them back. And that's the only way to build sustainable peace in Europe, from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jukka. That was 5 minutes well spent. Peter, 6 months of cooperation within the framework of NATO, Finland, Sweden, side by side in NATO. What are your impressions so far?
The most important question for NATO and Sweden and Finland is to support Ukraine. we have the challenge against the security order in whole Europe and also in the Nordic countries there. And what's happened on the front line in Ukraine is something that are directly connected to what sort of society we are going to have in the future for our children and grandchildren. So we must support Ukraine and we must be united. That is the main challenge, and that is something that must unite all of us in NATO. What can we do then? I think there must be done more about production of weapon and ammunition directly to NATO, to Ukraine. And I think that the Swedish and Finnish government should sign an industrial agreement. One topic there must be new production lines that will be invested, and we can produce ammunition to Ukraine there together, but also deliver some ammunition to our own storages. Another topic we can have in that sort of agreement is to have a cooperation around airborne warning radar. We have the global eye system in Sweden that also can be something that can be connected to Finland if we want that and negotiate about an agreement. I think also that Sweden and Finland step by step must have more the same type of weapon and ammunition, and in that way use our resources in a better way. And I think that the industrial agreement must also be discussed with the defense industry in both these countries, and from that platform then we can develop something very good for both nations. I think we should cooperate Finland and Sweden inside NATO together with Norway and Denmark and the Baltic states to have some sort of view about what we want and how we should handle the Nordic territory. Because if we are not active in this question, I think we will have not so good planning as we want to have. We know the environment, we know the territories, we know the circumstances, and we must be very, very active on this. And I think also that the planning we did between Sweden and Finland about operational planning beyond peace, as we called it, when we were members of NATO, is a very good platform for this job. And that have been very good platform for both of our countries, member of NATO. Now we have this FLF mission in the northern part of Finland, and I think that we can start with this stuff that we have agreed upon, and but I think there will be more. How much I cannot say, and I will not say any level of how much soldiers we can send there, but I think it step by step will be stronger and bigger, and that's necessary if we should have the right way of deterrence against Russia. We have also, in the coming time here, we have a decision in the Swedish parliament about the brigade to Latvia. 600 soldiers and a lot of equipment and weapon systems, and that will start in the beginning of 2025. And I think that this is a natural thing as a NATO member to contribute to Latvia for deterrence to Russia. I also see it as a natural thing to use some Swedish jet fighters also in some sort of NATO operation, and also on the Navy side the same. And that is also something that will happen on the Finnish side. So this is not only Sweden. We have to do our duty, both of us. And that's a natural thing, and I think that everybody is convinced with that. We will also in Sweden now discuss big defense bill, and it's agreement with 8 parties behind, and it's about investments in the defense up to the level 64 billion Swedish crowns. It's a huge amount of money, and we have since 2014 until 2025 we will increase the number of money in defense with 100%. It's many topics in this defense build that we will make a decision around, but one main topic is to decide that we will have 4 brigades ready 2030, and we will raise the conscription service up to 10,000 conscripts each year. Then we have plans for more after that. But that is some topics. There is also it's many dimensions and many topics in this. But we take these situations seriously, and a part of this defense bill is also investment in civilian defense. That is very important. Otherwise, the military defense will not work in a direct situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Tommy, you're the first term in the Finnish Parliament, and immediately in the hardcore of security and defense politics, also chairing the Finnish NATO parliamentarian delegation. Your insights so far about Finnish-Swedish cooperation and the life in NATO?
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you having me here. And I will, of course, use my opportunity to introduce myself a little bit more, because I'm the new face here, first timer. So my background is 30 years in Finnish Defense Forces as an officer, and I retired a couple of years ago as a lieutenant colonel. I have 10 years of experience in combat engineering, 10 years in logistics, and also some duties in the Finnish Air Force for about 10 years. So that's shortly my background for this, and I think that it has been preparing me very well for this Defense Committee duties which we have now in Finnish Parliament. And yeah, about 1 year ago, I was appointed to be the head of the Finnish delegation to NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and just in case if everyone is not so familiar with this organization, it is 281 parliamentarians from NATO countries, or these observer countries, or the countries which are now in the process to be a NATO country. And in those meetings, which I have been participating now for about 1 year, about almost every month, we have very good meetings and talks with the parliamentarians about the direction where the NATO should go, and how each country's parliament is, what is the opinion of those parliaments. And for example, today we are a very good example about this parliamentarians, how vast and how good this organization is, because all of us four are also NATO Parliamentary Assembly members. And if I want to highlight something, I will bring up a couple of things from the last year about the experiences which I have. Is that last spring we were having a meeting in Brussels, and Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was underlining and enhancing one thing. There are no such thing than Nordic bloc inside the NATO. There are no bloc anywhere inside the NATO. There are certain kind of area of operation in up north, and we are very, very careful how we are pronouncing, how we are describing this northern component here up north. So it's northern flank, it's high north, but there are no bloc. That's something which he was underlining in the time, and that is something which we are underlining also in our meetings all the time. And I would like to bring up one big topic which is rising up now. If I have my history lessons right, the Canada was not very keen to let anyone to interfere in the security and defense of the Arctic area in the let's say the future past years. But now, when China and Russia has been increasing their influence in that area, Canadians have rising up the issue in a very big way, in a strong way, inside the NATO PA meetings. They are raising up this question in the coming meeting, which we are having in Montreal in November, and it will be a very severe topic over there, that the Arctic area is one of the most significant areas of defense and security in NATO countries. And that is very common in the NATO PA. There are also the group of the Mediterranean area countries which would like to highlight the problems and the security and the defense problems in the Mediterranean area, and the Nordic countries will have extremely important role to bring up this Arctic area and the Nordic area. Because at the same time, the NATO will, let's say, turn the face and turn the eyes to the Nordic area, Arctic area, it will also have the eyes on the Baltic Sea and the Nordic countries. So that is something which I would like to rise up, that this direction about Arctic areas security will rise in the coming few years in our meetings at least. So the other thing is that the Kola Peninsula, if I have it right, it is the most, there are most nuclear weapons in the whole world. So that is one of the reasons why NATO is also very interested in about these experiments which Russia are doing over there in that area. They are using the new weaponry over there, they're testing their weapons there, they are practicing over there and trying to create and increase their influence in that area by being military more and more present. And that is one of the reasons why the Arctic area is rising up into the topics in the coming meetings also. So shortly, that is something which I will put in my 5 minutes about the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, what kind of topics we have had so far there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. During the Cold War, some people called the American nuclear weapons for war, and the Soviet ones and the Kola Peninsula for weapons of peace. But now we know better. Yeah. They could be lethal for anyone. Our other officer, Lars, who has now his political uniform on, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I would also like to return back to the importance for not NATO, but also for the Nordic countries within NATO to stand up against the Russian aggression and the support of Ukraine. Because it's not just a matter of peace in Europe, but basically prevent a next world war. Because we are very much in the similar situation as in late autumn 1941. If you imagine China taking the role of Japan, sitting and just waiting for having the back free, and then seizing an opportunity. Maybe they had like 6 months, they calculated, and then they actually threw an attack on Southeast Asia. If we can stand up against that and make Russia weak, we can prevent this from happening, and I think that's extremely important. Coming further, I totally agree with the points that Peter brought up against cooperation when it comes to material procurement and production. But let's not forget some of these nitty-gritty details that are pretty boring to talk about. But that is basically having them interchangeability, providing tactical cooperation and support as well, especially when it comes to maintenance. Because even if you have the similar tanks, you want a cogwheel help from a Finnish tank company, you want the help from a Swedish maintenance shop. But if you don't have the same maintenance language and can tell what you need, you won't get anything. Because if the Finnish tank has a cogwheel with letters describing what it is, and the Swedish ones have numbers, you won't get anything. So it's very, very important that we standardize this in order to actually being able to help each other. A third part I would like to mention is that we encourage and facilitate a much closer total defense planning in our common border areas, especially the Tornedalen area. We must reduce the risk for bottlenecks, especially Tornio-Haparanda area, where we change from normal railroad gauge to broad railroad gauge. That will create a bottleneck with reloading points that will be extremely tempting for the Russians to strike at, and that will cause enormous problem for anyone on the eastern side of the river. We should also enable cross-country social security and rescue services and enable them to cooperate already in peacetime. And that is not the case really today. I know that there are some initiatives, but they need to speed up. Today, I think Tornio and Haparanda, they are sharing one fire brigade car with a ladder, and that is not enough. But if you can make it work already in peacetime, then we can be quite sure it will work at least good enough in wartime if it happens. My last point, there will be some remarks about these forward land forces in Finland. And my advice here is basically have a vision from start and think big. And then fill it out as we proceed, as we get the NATO regional plans, etc. But basically have a vision of this FLF as the embryo of a kind of tactical command north, including both Finland and Sweden. Because you will need also the rear areas, the line of communications through Sweden. And the earlier we start thinking about this, the better. Also, when you establish this, think about cooperating with the Center of Excellence in Elverum for operation in cold climate. And not only when it comes to mechanized brigade operation, but also to what you in Finland would call sissy operations. Because the opponent here, he has a healthy respect for Finnish woodmanship, I would say. And this can be extremely effective in this roadless land up north. So the FLF is a quite strong signal to Russia and extremely important. It must be flexible, it must be forceful. And Sweden and Finland's common task here, it is, if I paraphrase General Sanders at the Virta Bridge, and also try to my Google Finnish here, is älä anna paholaisen ylittää raja. Kiitos.
Thank you, Lars. Exactly, that's the point. Well, there are a lot of interesting angles here to elaborate on, but I would like to start, Peter, with one question. I think you have heard it before. During your 8 years as defense minister, you had a lot of special important moments, but one of them was on the 11th of April 2022 at 8:15 in the morning. What happened then and why?
Yes, it was a process to think about and discuss and analyze what we should do when the war have started in Ukraine. You cannot take a decision around NATO membership from one day to another. You must also see what it means and what is the strategical point of view and what sort of impact will that have on your own country and the neighborhood, and also what are the others doing, and the others is in this case Finland. And what I did this morning was to, after this process with also myself, said that now I have decided that from my point of view it's the only thing we can do is to join NATO. So I delivered that message at that time that you have said now. So that was what happened.
At 8:15 a.m.
Yes. You have to deliver sometimes.
How many of you could exactly point at the time of the, not only the year, but also time of the day when you decided what you think about NATO?
Yeah, I finalized the process. I watched the clock and then it's now it's happened for me. But it's a step-by-step process. And I didn't want to be in some sort of rush here, because we had 200 years of non-alignment, and we had a lot of processes during the 8 years I was defense minister, especially with Finland, about cooperation. So if it took some months there, I think we started directly in March with this process formally, and we finished this 2 months later or something. I think it was 2 months and some days. So it was a very fast process. So I don't know if we should concentrate so much around the specific date. I did it.
I did it my way, as somebody said or sang once upon a time. How would you describe your everyday life in the committees when it comes to NATO membership? How big part of your agenda is in one way or another affected by the Finnish or Swedish NATO membership? Is a kind of mainstream thing or certain issues? Please. Jukka.
Well, I had the experience of being in the Defense Committee previous season too, so I have 4 years as a member of Defense Committee, and now I've started as the chairman for a little over a year. And comparing to the time before NATO, the work of the committee has become much, much more international. So we have this international component in our work every day present. We travel a lot. We need to get to know our allied friends. They need to know us, and so forth. And we have different meetings in different countries, so we travel. Then a lot of people, allied countries, representatives travel to us and come to see us in Finland. And I'd say that every day someone or something international, kind of international, happens in our work. And that's, of course, it's thrilling and it's very exciting and interesting to be especially chairing the committee in these days, because so many things are happening all the time.
And Peter, you were also chairing the committee in 2011 for 2 years. You can also compare.
Yes, but I can say like this, that we will have special topics around NATO with informations and also suggestions. The informations will be before there will be a meeting in the circle of defense ministers in NATO. And maybe we also can get reports afterwards. And there will also be specific topics that will come up, for example, about this FLF operation in the northern part of Finland. And we will also now have this operation in Latvia that we will decide around. So it will be a new situation with more of these international questions. But I have also to say that we had international missions before also. We had in Mali, we had in Afghanistan, we have in different parts of the world. So the international topics have also been very important. And I can also say that during the 8 years we were in government, from our side, we also have all these agreements with other countries. I think we made around 20 defense cooperation agreements with other countries, and that was also something that were reported to the Defense Committee. And so the international questions have been there, but not in the same dimension as it will be in the future.
Now with Finland and Sweden in NATO, all five Nordic countries are NATO countries. Not all of us are in the European Union, but we're all now in NATO. So that means that the NATO defense planning, at least one part of the center of gravity has moved towards the northeast and made the Baltic area very important, also from a strategic point of view, of course, and then we have the borderline. But still, Finland and Sweden, close neighbors with long experience of very good bilateral cooperation, that continues also in the NATO context. But how? What do you think about Finnish fighter jets and ships patrol Finnish airspace and waters in the future, or the vice versa? How far can we go?
Do you mean in cooperation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually like to see a united Finnish-Swedish Air Force, or even with the Norwegians and Danes, because we can really make a complement to each other. And that also comes, of course, for the land forces, as well as the naval forces, that we can cooperate, because together we have more than 200, I think almost 250 aircraft of quite high capability. And if we can unite them under one command and use them tactically and operationally in the most efficient way, that will be really a deterring effect. So absolutely, we should pursue this in every domain.
Jukka?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Lars, and I think that we actually have pretty much reached the sort of situation that there are no borders and no restraints in our cooperation. But whenever needed, we just act together, and that's it.
If I may add also that your previous question was about this, how NATO can be seen in our committees and in our parliaments. This is exactly what is happening. It's so international, as Jukka was mentioning. Let's say 2 weeks ago, we were visiting Sweden and Norway. 1 week before that, we were in Prague, in Poland, and 1 week before that, was also a Defense and Security Committee from NATO PA was visiting also United States and Alaska. So it's so international in this moment that you just have to learn how to speak English if you want to communicate with your friends. It has to be done, even up here. But this is forming so vast, and it's quite demanding for the parliamentarians. I think that we are changing, in fact, hats when we meet under the umbrella of the NATO PA, or is it going to be Defense Committee from our parliament, which is visiting Swedish colleagues over there? We are doing a lot of cooperation in these days. Let's say not every week, but at least every month.
Peter.
We created a Swedish naval task group once upon a time, and I visited this unit, and to see them in some sort of action was to see one whole unit. It was not Sweden and Finland, it was one unit. And they know each other very well, and they have exercised together so many times. So it was one unit. And that must be the goal also, to have that sort of cooperation on the local basis in the defense organizations, that we have people on the basic platform that know each other and can operate together. And I now talking both about Army and Air Force. I met, for example, soldiers up in Rovajärvi with an artillery exercise. We had people from our artillery regiment in Boden, and then we have units from Finland, and they operated very closely. And that was also another example of how we can do. So I think that have this sort of basic cooperation, when people from the countries meet all the time and do things together, cooperate in the staffs, cooperate in exercises and so on. I also remember an exercise we had up in the northern part of Sweden when we have, I think it was 1,200 conscripts from Finland. And the first thing that happened, it was that they were ill in the stomach. It was a problem in the beginning, but they were very interested in this exercise. And I talked to many of them about how interesting they were and how they also think it's a very good thing to be here. So they were very, very motivated. That was my impression. So I think that it's also good for the soldiers to meet each other in both countries. This is a huge challenge to build this sort of network. It will take a lot of time, but that is the only way to create a situation when we can talk about that. We have one army, one air force, one navy, and if we can expand it to the other Nordic countries, that's very, very good, because that make it stronger. I think it's not so complicated in the Air Force if you have the same leadership and you can use the resources all over the place. But in the other areas, it needs more of work. But I think it's a good vision, it's a good idea to work for that, because we will be stronger together. And to have, for example, an Air Force with 265 aircraft from all the Nordic countries, that's a very strong Air Force. And that is something that is really deterring also for the Russians. But we should not forget the Balts, because they always talk, you don't see us. You only talk about the Nordic countries. We must have them inside in this, because there we have a long border also to Russia. And I think that this contribution to Latvia that we are going to do from the Swedish side can be one way to open up the doors there. And I think also that Baltic air policing is something that are very simple to go into from our countries. And I think that must be also a responsibility. So I think we share the view, but it's a lot of work.
And now when we started to share things 2 weeks ago when we were visiting Sweden, I want to share with you the joke with what was told by a Swedish officer. I hope that Peter is not referring to this, that he wants us to have a common one army, because the joke was that the Swedes are ready to fight until the last Finn. But that was a joke over there at that time.
Yeah, I can just comment on that. We made me a little bit more professional nowadays because another friend of mine who was a commander of the Nisula brigade until recently, he said a couple of years ago that we always study the Swedes very carefully and when we do the opposite. So that's probably why you have retained your very good army.
Since I think 2009 we have this forum for Nordic defense cooperation called Nordefco. Now, of course, with all the Nordic countries in NATO, the Nordefco could have a new role. Maybe not as a Nordic bloc, forming a Nordic bloc in the NATO bloc would mean that we have some kind of conflicts maybe internally. But maybe in the name of cooperation, what could we do with Nordefco, the 5 Nordic countries, and of course also in connection to the Baltic countries, the NB8, 5+3? Could we form some kind of new body, informal body, not against anyone, but in the name of coordination?
I think so, and I think it's necessary, because if you don't cooperate the Nordic countries, I think we will lose the possibility to make as good planning for these countries as good as it can be. Because we have the knowledge about the environment and we have the experience of this environment and we know best about this. And if we cooperate around it, it's a better position to also the other NATO countries to understand what we are trying to do here. And we should never forget that we are NATO in this area. We are NATO. NATO is not nobody else. It's not United States that are coming here or UK or somebody else. We are NATO here, and we must take that responsibility. And that means that we also have to use Nordefco from that perspective. And from that perspective, we also can have a higher level of impact directly in NATO. And I have been on this NATO ministers meeting as a partner, together with the Finnish minister. And it's very easy to see that there are so many interests. And if you are some defense ministers that can keep together from a position, you have a better position to have a real influence or real impact. But if you are alone, then you are alone. And that can be a huge problem to get a real impact. So I think that we have to cooperate. So we have a regional responsibility.
Jukka, what does Nordefco 2.0 look like?
Yeah, I'd say that it's definitely speaks for its place when we're considering defending the Nordic countries and the Arctic area, because we are here and we are natural defenders of the Lapland and North area and Arctic area. So definitely this concept is needed. But then to be able to defend Nordic area, you have to have good control of the Baltic Sea. And in comes NB8. So we need to cooperate and we need to have seamless cooperation with the Baltic countries, Poland and other NB8 or the NB8 concepts. So we need this all. And it's just one day you speak about this and the other day that, but it all is tied together. So even though if we focus on our strengths in the concept of Nordefco, in some cases, we need to remember that we are all the alliance, the whole alliance is in this together, and everything is tied together and chained to each other. So that's why all these concepts are needed.
Well, since we are friends of interaction between politicians and the people, it's time to bring in the people. So if you have any questions in mind, please put up your hand. It's like in American weddings, speak up now or keep quiet forever. All right. Okay, yeah, please, Arto, come back to you, please.
Thank you very much for an active discussion. My name is Ulla Hentonen. I'm a doctoral researcher at University of Tampere, and I came back from a research visit in Washington, D.C. a few months ago. So my question relates to U.S. relations and Finnish and Swedish NATO membership. So they would love to hear a discussion like we've seen today, very active, ambitious membership from both parties. But what can and should we do more as new NATO allies to strengthen the US commitment to NATO and European security also going forwards? Thank you very much.
A question raised less than 1 month before the elections.
Me? Okay, thank you. Well, good question. Yeah, congratulations. Yes. To increase US involvement, I think we've done a lot for that. For example, we have these DCA agreements in place both in Sweden and Finland just recently, and the cooperation in that framework is starting and going forward. I hope that it will be as deep and strong as possible. Then we also have to understand US strategic position, which is not only focused on Europe, but there's the Indo-Pacific area, and then God knows what will happen in Middle East. I mean, it's heating up, if you may say so. So in that sense, I'd also emphasize the European responsibility. So the European component of NATO and those countries who are not putting the 2% of their GDP to their defense should act fast, like real fast, and build this up so that we can provide sort of credibility towards US too, so that and show that we are serious. We're not just expecting you to come or US to come and save us, but we're in this together because that's the basis of whole alliance.
Very shortly, I will add that in these meetings which I have been participating so far, Finland and Sweden both are very appreciated countries in this moment inside the alliance. The know-how which we have, the experience which we have, we know the difference between white snow and yellow snow, and we can operate in this northern area over here. And it is the part of the NATO have to take care somehow. Or who is the best one to take care of? As Peter has told many times, we are here already. We will take care of the northern flank of the NATO. So we are giving quite a lot already. But about this election, I will not comment because even the experts are denying about that.
Thank you. We have 2 questions. Please go straight to the point because we're running out of time. General Räty first.
My question was already asked.
All right. Thank you. And then the other one.
Thank you. Ted Urho, I'm the executive manager of the think tank Agenda and also editor-in-chief of Fanbäraren, the proud magazine of Nylands Brigade. Finland is as we know, bilingual country with Finnish and Swedish as its 2 national languages. Sweden is obviously a Swedish-speaking nation. If we have military cooperation between these 2 countries, which should be the lingua franca, English or Swedish?
Or Finnish.
Well, that was a tricky one. Who's the first?
Peter.
Yes, it's not so complicated. I think that we must understand each other, and if the only way to understand each other is English, we must have English, because if Swedish army units and Finnish army units cooperate, we must have the order language in a language that the soldier understand 100%, and because of that, I think that it's many of the Finnish that do not understand Swedish fully, partly maybe, but on the Swedish side, it's very few that can speak Finnish. So the solution maybe is English there. Nylands Brigade that is another situation, because they cooperate with our amphibious units from Berga outside Stockholm. And there I think the language is Swedish, because all involved can talk that language. So I think that the reality will sort this out.
As a military point of view, my experiences are from this Nordic cooperation. For example, United Nations peacekeeping forces, Nordic countries did already divide the responsibilities in a way that Denmark is taking care of the military police, Norway was taking responsibility of logistic officers course, which I have been participating myself too, and I have been also instructor in United Nations military observer course, which was taking place in Finland. And in all of those courses were already, it was English every time. So the military persons are very, let's say, familiar with this choice of speech and language. And even it was very polite. Even all the others could speak and understand Swedish still every time a Finn entered the room. They turned it into the English. That was very, very nice, of course, of us, but for us. But so the military persons are very used to English already because the terms and the words and whatever you're using or operational skills or plans which you are doing, it's very good to have it according to NATO standards.
Yeah, I would just agree to that because it's the same as you have on an airline. You speak English even if you are two Swedish pilots in the plane because you have to use the same language. You have to use it when you communicate with the ground control and everything. And the same here, we have NATO standards, we have NATO phrases, acronyms. That will be the basic language. And then we can, as Peter said, be pragmatic and explain things more clearly in our own languages. But the English has to be the NATO language, because we have two official languages in NATO.
I think those who have served in Nylands Brigade know that there are in practical terms 3 languages: Swedish, the commands in Finnish, and then the dialects like the Nykvist dialect, amongst others. That's also diversity. Okay, any questions? Yeah, please.
Aapo Pukarinen from the European Commission representation here in Helsinki. There are a million things going on in the EU about ramping up the production of military equipment. There is the dimension of EU-NATO cooperation. What are your main takes? What do you expect from the starting Commission in the next term to do in that field? And also, I would be interested to have your view about what the Commission, what do you expect from the forthcoming Commission regarding EU's improved military procurement? Thank you.
Keeping in mind that this Commission will have the first full-time defense commissioner ever. Okay. Jukka.
Okay, so that's a tough one, but let me start. First of all, we need more funds, allocation of funds for defense procurement, and so that the member countries could finance different projects to support Ukraine and their own forces. Also, maybe we should, as EU, set up some sort of a goal for this war too, because just the mere statement that we will support Ukraine as long as needed is kind of vague and lame, if I may say so. And maybe we should be more stern in our voicing out the outcome that we pursue, and that should also help the work of Kubilius, who is, as far as I know, the new defense commissioner, or will be. And of course the goal should be a sustainable peace in Europe. Now, how to achieve this, I know that the new Commissioner Kubilius will have an excellent plan because he explained it to me, but let's hear it from him first. I will not refer to it now. But anyway, funding, and then the defense industry sector. Okay, it's complicated sector, so I don't say we need more standardization, but not common procurement, because that's possibly one of the caveats in this, that if we go to common procurement, then especially little countries like Sweden and Finland in this defense industry will suffer, because we're not possibly able to produce common goods in that quantity that's bigger countries. But that's just voicing out my thoughts. These are not finished thoughts at the moment.
Thank you. Peter.
Yes. I think we must have more of new production lines. And if European Union can help with that, that's very important. And I mean also that the states have to act in that direction. And I think that is very important with direct economical guarantees from European Union and the states to the industry that if you now build new production line, we guarantee the production, because this must be done in a so unbureaucratic way and not time-wasting way as possible, because sometimes we have too many regulations and rules that we try to follow, and it's too much of competition between different countries and forces inside the European Union. But now we must concentrate on that these new production lines must exist. And that is a duty for European Union, but it's also a duty for each country to work in that way, because we have a war there every day at the front line, and it's a delivery of weapon and ammunition that are the most important thing. It's not the rules and regulations inside European Union.
And definitely the taxonomy and ESG criteria that Commission enforces in dividing what industries are acceptable and what are not, what are sustainable, what are not, should be changed so that defense industries are not in the same basket as pornography, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and so forth. Please.
It's the EIB, apparently.
Sorry?
The EIB, not the Commission, which looks after the criteria.
Okay, to be continued, I guess. All right, with these words, thank you very much for your insights. This section is finished now, and now we go for the next one, the last one. Thank you very much. All right, and the last section, in fact, it's about, we now heard the politicians, now it's time for the researchers, and we have the researchers dialogue, who will tell us their insights under the headline, Finland and Sweden take responsibility for the joint defense in NATO. And I would like to invite Gunilla Herold, who is senior researcher at the Swedish Institute for International Affairs. Please choose a seat. Joel Linaimäki, who is also researcher, Finnish Institute for International Affairs. Welcome. And Iiro Särkkä, who is senior research fellow at the Finnish Institute for International Affairs. A lot of international affairs here, as it should be. Please. Okay, and I've also asked you, each of you, to deliver 5 to 7 minutes of your personal thoughts. They don't necessarily have to be directly connected to the headline, because you're researchers, you will anyway elaborate very broadly, so you can now do it with an official mandate. Maybe, what about to start with our foreign guest? You almost feel, it feels like a domestic guest, that's right. Finland and Sweden as one. But please, anyway, Gunilla.
Is this working? Yeah. I don't feel very foreign. I never feel very foreign here. Anyway, I am going to talk under the heading, Finland and Sweden take responsibility for the joint defense in NATO, as you have given me. I would like to start first with the word responsibility. Finland and Sweden are the only countries this far who have joined NATO while there is an ongoing war in Europe. This is a difference to others. We are also countries that may well be at the front line or close to the front line. And we are also thinking about the terrible prospect of soon having to be in the position that our preparations are being tested by someone who wants the worst for us. So considering this situation, the responsibility comes very easily for us. This is what we have been talking about the whole time. And just as Kristi Raik said in the beginning, this is so different to any other country in Europe outside the Nordic-Baltic region. But there are new things for us. There is a new mindset that we have to apply. We have been talking about our country, we have been talking about our region very much, which is good. But now our mindset has to be that it's NATO as such that is to be defended. And this may be difficult for us because we are not used to it, but we have to do it. And when we see what Finland has done participating in the air policing in Romania, that's a very good step to show that Finns who are a frontline state also takes others' concerns seriously. Another thing is equally important, and that is to respect and to learn about the threat scenarios of other countries. In the south, they don't see Russia as the main threat. It's migration, it's terrorism, and they've had a lot of that. It's also natural catastrophes. And we have to take that seriously because they are also our threats. We are not immune to complications because of all these. So we've had our little share of terrorism as well. So this is in order for NATO to be as cohesive as possible, which is absolutely necessary. And if we go further south, we will see that the cohesion is really cracking and has been for some time. And in particular, if we look at the Mediterranean, where even if we have the normal threats, so to say, we have Russia as a threat, they are advancing in the Mediterranean. We have China, which is not a military threat as we see it now, but still a complication. But we have the problem between Turkey, Greece on the one hand, Greece and Cyprus on the other. Even France was involved a couple of years ago when it came to skirmishes between the ships of the various countries. And the situation at that time, this was before Ukraine, was so bad, so Secretary General Stoltenberg said that this lack of cohesion within NATO is one of our main problems right now. And they haven't gone away. They are there still, even though they are not as dramatic as they were at the time. Some of you may remember the French expression, NATO is brain dead. That was a low point, and I think that it was regretted by the person who said it too. It's not constructive. On a global level, we have the Indo-Pacific area, which has also become more and more prominent as a strategic area for us to think about. It's not only about the relations between United States and China, it's also about the countries that are seen as strong partners to NATO, and it's also about a range of other countries. These are crucial areas. Yesterday, before I left home, I got in my mailbox a Swedish document on Swedish interest in this area. I think it's an excellent thing for Sweden and Finland to do together, because it's about responsibility, as it has to be, but it's also about our interests in the area, which we have. And then going to the West, what we most of the time think about right now, the election in the United States. We don't know what will happen, but if the outcome is not what most of us hope for, there will be tasks for Finland and Sweden to make the situation as good as it is and our continued security as good as it can be. Now coming back to Europe, there is one particular issue that is worrying me a bit. And this is about the situation now when the very positive thing happened that Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova were accepted as candidate states for one day at least becoming members of the EU. It will take time, we know that, because it will be a merit-based approach. They will have to fulfill a number of criteria. But what we also know, and what we saw immediately after this announcement, was the Russian reaction. And when I think about the situation that will be coming now, it will be a gradual kind of integration into Europe. This is more or less in agreement. What will happen then? These countries will come closer and closer to the European Union. They will have access to more and more of the information, which is absolutely proper and right, and would be a very good thing if it had not been for what we must expect, and that is even harder Russian reactions. And what can the EU do in a situation like that? There is no deterrence in the EU. 42.7, these are figures. There is nothing behind it. The only organization we have in Europe is NATO. So it is a positive development on the whole, but it is also, as I see it, a very dangerous development. And we have to be prepared for that. We have seen what the Russians can do, and we know that they will definitely not accept a development like that, having these three countries in the EU. One might say they could be in NATO first, and that would be great, but there is no appetite for that in NATO. And by the way, Moldova is neutral. So this will not happen either. Now, to the final thing that I'm going to say, and the most important, that is about Ukraine. And it has been said several times before, but I want to repeat it anyway. Ukraine is now fighting our war in Europe. And this is what the leadership of NATO and the leadership of EU agree with. And we in the North agree as well, very strongly. But this is not the case in the whole of the EU or NATO. And why not? Well, some countries are perhaps dependent on oil and gas, which they could have changed, but they haven't. Some of them would prefer to see the old system with, for some, fair degree of business transactions, which was benefiting Russia but also benefiting them, come back into life again. Some see it as see it that it is because they think it is good for the peace, not thinking about that it is also rewarding aggression. Some are simply the friends of Russia. We have a duty, who think otherwise, in Sweden and Finland. We should do more. We should definitely do more. At least, as someone said yesterday, we could try to be better than Denmark. If we look at the share of the GDP that countries devote to Ukraine, I think this is the right measure. Denmark is higher than us, and why should we let them have this victory over us? No. I'm not the one who said that first. That was someone else, Jukka maybe. And we have to talk to the other countries. We have to convince like-minded countries who are, for some reason, becoming weaker now, that we have to do this. And it's for our future, it's for our children, it's for our grandchildren to be able to live in a safe and democratic world. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunilla. Ira, please.
Thank you so much, and lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad that Gunilla kind of covered the global perspective, because I'm going to zoom into the northern flank in my remarks. So I'd just like to start by saying that I think NATO's Nordic enlargement, Finland and Sweden becoming the 31st and the 32nd members of the alliance, really is a game changer when it comes to NATO's military planning. because as we all know, during the post-Cold War period, that was much of a forgotten flank, the northern flank, and center of gravity kind of shifted to the out-of-area operations, and now after 2014 again, we've seen it shifting to maybe to the central Europe, the eastern flank, to a certain extent also to the southern flank in NATO. But now, since Finland and Sweden are members, I see the center shifting also to a certain extent to the north. So I think when you look at Finland and Sweden, I mean, we are the missing piece of the puzzle. We will bring an enormous amount of land space, airspace, maritime space to the alliance. And I could think of at least 3 accounts where we're similar, but at the same time where we're dissimilar as well when it comes to the NATO membership. And the first one is geography. I mean, Finland, as we all know, frontline state with a huge border with Russia. Sweden kind of tucked in between, being in a safer spot into a certain extent, but also having a huge maritime border in the Baltic Sea region as well. Also, that impacts the kind of roles that these 2 countries will play in NATO. Both are certainly security providers, but Finland, as being a frontline state, is going to be a staging, actually the battleground if a conflict would take place. Obviously, none of us hope that will happen, and that's why NATO really, I think, needs to bring up deterrence by denial posture in this part of the world. Sweden, on the other hand, being the logistics hub where all the troops can be assembled and transported through to the Finnish territory if that's needed. And the third way I can think of how that is impacted or impacts the 2 countries is the capability planning and the different domains. I mean, Finland, we have the expertise in the land domain, land warfare. That's been just reflected in the decision to establish the component command in Mikkeli in last week or a few weeks ago. Sweden having more the naval assets, but the air power, I'm really happy that in the previous panel you touched upon the air power. That is something that unites us, and I think we can take a lot of synergies out of that. So I think these different kind of requirements that it imposes for the 2 countries could be taken all the way to NATO's defense planning, and will be taken, the kind of minimum military requirements that we will see. But also we could have capability areas where the 2 countries could, or the 4 Nordic countries could have, in fact, common capability targets in some time in the future. So I think the real question marks will come into play how we will continue to be similar or dissimilar. First of all, relates to resources. Will we continue to see this upward trend of spending 2% or more? I'm happy to see that both Finland and Sweden exceed that target now easily, but will that continue to be so in the future? How do the national economies develop? That's a really good question. And the second thing is the public support. I was having an interesting dinner conversation yesterday, and I heard that also in Sweden, a huge amount of the Swedes actually want to defend their own country, which is a really good thing. But whether this will change in the future in Finland and in Sweden will, I think, largely depend how the membership in NATO will play out. So my second point, what should be done with all these different formats, flexible formats that we have, bilateral, trilateral, minilateral ones. I think they should be used at maximum to basically integrate Finland and Sweden to NATO. Not necessarily as separate structures, but learn to use them as tools to integrate us into NATO. So I think there might be some thinking that we have to do how to continue with these formats in the future. And I think it goes in all levels of defense planning, whether it's the strategic level, the operational level, the tactical level, whether it's the different aspects of capability we're talking about, doctrine, training, organization, material, learning personnel, etc., but also stakeholders like industry. We heard in the previous panels, how could we engage the defense industry in the Nordic countries between Finland and Sweden to cooperate more. And my last point actually ties up with Gunilla's points about the global landscape, is that while we are very strong here in the high north, while we are the Arctic states, together with Canada and the United States, and we should be the ones who look after this region, I think we shouldn't forget the other Arctic stakeholders, that are the Baltic countries, Germany, Poland, the United Kingdom, maybe France as well, in the future, how they could have a role to play in the Arctic, also the Indo-Pacific partners. So rather than making ourselves like an exclusive club, I don't think that's what's happening now. We should try to utilize all these different global networks together and build a stronger defense posture in the High North region.
Thank you. Joel, who also had an early wake-up call this morning because you were in the TV sofa before 7, I guess? 6:40. And now 6:40, all right. Congratulations. And now, please, the floor is yours.
Well, I just want to start by noting that it's great to be here with Iro and Gunilla as well, amongst friends and home away from home, Helsinki for you. And Stefan, you asked in the previous panel from the panelists, when did you know that you should support or you want to support NATO membership? And I only say this half jokingly, but I worked in the previous government as an advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So on the day of the invasion, when the invasion started, I woke up to an SMS from the advisor, the Minister of Defense, which simply said, "Are you guys going to tweet?" And without reading the news, I replied, of course, immediately, yes. And then I started working. And that was basically the moment I knew that things have to change. And I only say this half jokingly because I know that in Finland, I'm guessing also in Sweden, there has been a race to our competition on who came up first with the idea of joining NATO, and I don't want to join that competition. I'm not that smart. But I want to shortly touch on 3 topics. First, on NATO integration, which is also something that Jukka and Lars, for example, spoke about in the last panel. Then the Arctic region and the meaning of Arctic, which is what Tommy spoke about in the last panel. And then preparedness and hybrid threats very shortly. I'm going to begin with NATO integration. I'm not going to repeat what Jukka Kopra very well put on the functioning and the meaning or the significance of the forward land forces. He explained it superbly, one of the best explanations I've heard so far, but maybe about the background for a slight bit. Finland's thinking on allied presence in Finnish soil has changed, and I would maybe argue that the 3 reasons are, first of all, that previously we were occupied with our NATO membership process rather than focused on what happens after the membership happens or takes place. Secondly, since we are now in NATO and part of all the processes within the alliance, our MOD and defense forces have a better grip on what our security and defense requires, what else we can, what kind of tools we can or should use to complement our national capabilities and defense. And then thirdly, simply because the security environment has further deteriorated, it's not looking great. So those are the reasons why our thinking on allied presence in Finland has changed. But as Jukka also argued, and I completely agree with him, we are very grateful to Sweden, of course, for being the framework nation and for being active and willing to engage with us and to build this concept around them. But of course, we would, in an ideal situation, want to see other countries participate as well, for the simple reason of having them exercise their forces here, having the readiness to also act in possible crises and emergencies. Then if you look at the future priorities for Finland's NATO integration, military mobility, which was also touched in the last panel, so I won't say anything more about that, host nation support, and the capacity to have allied forces arrive to Finland in different crises and emergencies. These are clear priorities for us. Next year's Hague Summit, NATO's Hague Summit, NATO is going to review its strategy on Russia, and surprisingly, that's something the Finns and Swedes are very interested in about, I'm guessing. But also, of course, the implementation of NATO's decisions on Ukraine aid are very critical to us. Then moving on to the Arctic region, as was maybe or mentioned in the previous panel, Finland views the Baltic Sea and the Arctic region as one strategic area. And for the simple reason that in the Murmansk area, the Murmansk region, Russia still has its strategic nuclear capabilities, still has their Northern Navy and their air forces, which are all quite intact and right next to us. So with these capabilities and from that position, Russia is able to threaten NATO's supply lines, which are running through the North Atlantic Sea. And that, of course, has a direct impact on our security and Sweden's and NATO's security as well. So from this perspective, it's critical for us as Finland that NATO would review its approach to the Arctic region and have an actual coherent strategy on the Arctic region so that we could have enough capabilities and force to produce enough deterrence and defense in all crises and situations. And then finally, on preparedness and hybrid threats, only very shortly. Firstly, on preparedness, this is linked both to what NATO is doing and what the European Union is doing. And that's because if you think about the critical functions of society and the continuity of critical functions related to social and economic life in crises and emergencies, even in conflicts, civilian side and military side support each other because defense and deterrence ensure that we can have continuity of certain critical functions, but also these civilian functions ensure that the military can operate and they have the support needed to continue operating in crisis. We know that in the next EU Commission we have 4 vice presidents working on these topics. One, Henna Virkkunen, who might be known to some people here, on digital sovereignty, but also in charge of defense matters. One executive vice president is working on economic security, which is of course related to de-risking and supply matters, one on external affairs and partnerships, and then finally on preparedness. So these topics are complementary but also divided, and it will take a lot for these executive vice presidents to work together. Finally, on hybrid, I just want to note that if you think about only one discussion that's been popping up a lot lately related to Ukraine, which is the question of long-range fires, the permission to use long-range fires by some countries like the United States. According to public sources, US intelligence has been concerned that if the permission would be granted, then Russia would increase its hybrid activities and sabotage activities and all these hostile actions against European countries and Western countries. And I would just maybe argue that that's a risk that's likely in any case if this war drags on and continues as it's likely. And that's something that we should be thinking about deterring and securing ourselves against anyway. So it's not much of an argument to make in not granting Ukraine the permission to use these long-range fires. And this is just one example of how hybrid threats are kind of intermingled with all the other risks and problems that we are facing at this moment. And finally, I just want to end and conclude by saying that when it comes to any of these issues and Russia, all our messages towards the Russians should be consistent and clear. Because if they are consistent, then they can predict what our behavior will be. But if our message changes on the way, for example, on drones flying through NATO airspace, then that makes it easier for them to try to find the weak spots in our defense and deterrence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel. One signal is, of course, to keep up deterrence, and deterrence is very much connected to armed forces and also arms production, the military sector. That has been mentioned by quite many speakers today also. In fact, during the morning when the defense committees met, there's been a kind of red thread today, what to do with the defense industry sector in Europe, how to boost this sector. After having been for maybe many decades little bit in the margin, in the category of suspect phenomenons, the defense industry has now become, after having been maybe a part of some kind of problem, it's now a part of the solution. And that's a huge change in mindset as far as this thing is concerned. What could we do as Nordic countries, as Finland and Sweden, to boost the sector, to change the mindset, the attitude towards the military sector, also when it comes to being an object for investments by pension, let's say talk about pension money, foundations, public spending. The military industry needs now a renaissance also, and when it comes to its reputation. I think it's been already restored. But what can we do to boost this process even more? Gunilla.
I think it's quite a difficult question. In a way, I think this is ongoing, even though it has not gone to the level that you would wish it to have. But we have for many years seen this industry as a kind of half suspicious, because we have always talked about the rules, how to restrict the Swedish industry, how to see to it that the Swedish weapons don't go to the wrong countries, etc., etc. So if this has been the only subject for many years, no wonder that it takes time when things have changed dramatically as they have now, for people to understand that this is what has to be done. I think the only way is to describe the situation as it is. Ukraine wants to defend itself. It has been attacked for no reason at all. Should the other democratic countries come to Ukraine's help or not? I mean, it could be framed very easily.
Talking about the important ESG criteria, they are of course environment, social, and governance, but it could also mean economy or energy, security, geopolitics, ESG. But we're not there yet.
No.
Joel and Ira.
Okay, maybe I'm not a defense industry expert myself, but I would say that we really need to overcome the national caveats to ramp up the production systems and cycles, and to make sure that those contracts are signed, because defense industry is not doing this for goodwill. I mean, they are doing it because they need to make money out of that, and they need to keep their companies running as well. And I think we need to think kind of strategically in that sense in different Nordic countries. I mean, could we procure something together? Do we actually need to develop this and that by ourselves? But could we procure something together? Could we have a division of labor and that? And it is difficult. We have national caveats and national industries who want to have their strong role to play. But I think the war in Ukraine and the current security situation has, showed that actually we cannot deliver in this pace if we continue like this. Russia's in war economy. We're not in war economy. So this is something we need to improve.
Yeah, maybe I would just add that, first of all, I completely agree with what Iro said. We can't look at this only from a national perspective or the perspective of our own industry. Finland has done a lot already on the production side. Sweden has done a lot. Nordic countries together are doing more and more. But that's not enough for the needs of Ukraine or even for the needs of our own defenses. We need to do a lot more together. And if that means that some of this production is going to Germany or France, I mean, so be it. That's the least of all evils in my perspective. But maybe I would ask you or add to your actual question, Stefan, just to say that transparency and maybe sustainability in the sense of political legitimacy, and by this I mean that if you say that you're producing ammunition to Ukraine or to Finnish defense forces, sure, there's some political concerns or political risks, and some people are unhappy, but it's not that large of a number of people. But it's the export-import side that includes larger political risks and larger political discussions. And when it comes to those, whether we're selling arms to Saudi Arabia or buying them from Israel, transparency and open public discussion, I think, are very healthy and critical.
Thank you. Opening up for the audience, Anders Gardberg, who was the first one.
Thank you. I have a question related a bit to the previous discussion when it was stated that there should be no Nordic blocks, and stating that. However, seeing on the factual situation, all four countries wanted to be under the same command under Norfolk, which again then brought some disturbance from Central Europe and the Baltics. So how would you see that? Is there in fact a Nordic bloc, and frankly, is there a problem with that? Because as it said, within NATO, together we're stronger.
Make the Nordics great again, you mean?
Well, firstly, I don't know. I don't remember where I read this, but maybe some newspaper or something. So somebody can correct me if I'm completely wrong, which wouldn't be unusual. But someone in Sweden said that Finland and Sweden have never been closer than now that we are both in NATO and working together on FLF and things like that. And on the lighter note, I would maybe argue that maybe we were slightly closer when Finland was part of Sweden, but we are quite close now. So I don't think there is a Nordic bloc, and even if there would be, we wouldn't maybe advertise it as such within NATO, because that would be terrible alliance politics in an alliance that relies on unity and unanimity. But factually speaking, and I think you're completely right, that we have joint interest in this area, and those interests require us to cooperate, and that's a good thing. And when it comes to, for example, NORDEFCO, which was what Iro also referred to here in the beginning, I think now that we are all in NATO, all Nordic countries, NORDEFCO is one tool of implementing those decisions which are made in NATO. For example, when it comes to regional defense plans or NDPP targets, capability targets, and so on and so forth. So it's not, I don't think these are exclusionary things. More is more. More cooperation is better than less cooperation.
I don't see it as a problem either. If we look at NORDEFCO during many years, it was about Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Denmark was not particularly interested at all. That worked as well. We are happy they are there now. But if we draw the picture a bit wider, we have the Baltic countries, but we also have Poland. If we go into the northern group, we have even more countries, which are like-minded countries. And we don't know about the situation in the future. The flexibility will probably be quite substantive, and we will see how countries unite for different missions. We have the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is terribly important for all of us, which hasn't been mentioned yet, which is under British command, Britain also being one of the like-minded countries. So I think, Anders, that we will see a huge flexibility, even if the four Nordic, and it's sad to say the four Nordic, there are five of us, even though Iceland is slightly outside the military part. Or totally outside the military part. Anyway, we are the core maybe, but there are others who are very close to us as well.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think there's a block either, but I would like to say that let's embrace the fact that we are so strong together and that we work together for years and we trust each other, and let's use the different instruments that we have, NORDEFCO, for instance, and somebody referred in the earlier discussion to Canada and the United States as well. Well, yes, we are the Arctic stakeholders, the Nordic countries, Canada and the US, and we are the ones who have to be looking after this area. Finland and Sweden, this is our homeland. I mean, I would be worried if we didn't focus on this area. This is where it has to happen for us. But at the same time, engaging with the partners. And I think it was a really clever move from Finland, for instance, to send that policing, fleets to the Black Sea region, because we could have done the Baltic area, obviously, but that I think would have been an additional add-on to the discourse that, they are a bloc in the north, they just care about themselves. So we do need to engage with the southern parts of Europe as well to understand those realities that they have in their mind as well. And that's very easily to be done through the peacetime operations such as air policing.
Yeah. Looking from a Nordic perspective, of course, we're discussing the Russian war in Ukraine. We're discussing the U.S. elections, the eastern borderline, and so forth. But are there things happening under the radar that we should pay more attention to? Do we have blind spots, for instance, when it comes to increased Chinese interest in the Arctic area? Is that happening under the radar?
I don't think it's happening under the radar. It's happening. But, we see, I think what we should be paying attention to is obviously the increased, great competition in the high north when it comes to natural resources, when it comes to freedom of navigation, when it comes to, military cooperation between Russia and China, for instance. I think this is one of those areas that we should be really looking into in the high north region. But when it comes to the elections, for instance, and how that will play out, I think we shouldn't be too worried as Nordic countries because we are committed to NATO's collective deterrence and defense. And whatever the outcome will be, I think we are quite safe. We have the DCA agreements as well. But how that will influence, the rest of the world and the security, how will that impact the situation in Ukraine? I mean, I think these are the kind of questions I would be more worried about, not about ourselves, but how Ukraine will sustain throughout this crisis if there's no support from the United States to the same extent anymore as there was before.
I think Iiro said it all. All my arguments were said by you, and then many more. So,
well, maybe I'll just build on what was said. Maybe not China's engagement on the Arctic, but I think we still are slightly not following enough the relationship between Russia and China and how that's developing, because our analysis is often very superficial. We just say, now Russia is more dependent on China and China is supporting Russia and we don't like that. And that's all true. But if this relationship takes a different course and, for example, joint military exercises become even more frequent than before in our region or near our region, or they start performing joint hybrid operations or intelligence operations or whatnot against us, that has a direct impact on our security, both in Finland and European countries.
Thanks. Now we have time for 2 short questions. Please, you were the first one.
Hello, Vivi Vagelo-Schellern from the Ministry of Interior. And just a comment, not on this question, but on the cooperation. I would say that every cooperation is very good. And in this sense, I would go back a little bit also to the things we talked about this morning. The whole of society, the civil part of this. Okay, now we talk about the joint defense, but we need to remember also the civil totalförsvaret, krisberedskap, samhällsberedskap, that part of it. And in this sense, I would say that don't forget the Haga and Nordefco cooperation. Haga is the cooperation we had already from 2009 with the civil part, and Finland will have the chairmanship both in Haga and in Nordefco next year, and we already started to discuss how we can, this civil-military Nordic cooperation, to take it forward, to really do something about it on paper. With all respect to Nordefco, but I do think that we need to really focus on these two parts, and talking about the Arctic and all cooperation, we need to really emphasize and really put our effort in this, and also the Finnish and Swedish cooperation that we have in both the civilian and the military side. Thank you.
Thank you. That was maybe more a comment. And then Peter Stenlund, who used to be the Finnish ambassador to Oslo, to Norway.
Thank you. One observation, it seems that one Baltic Sea country is non-existent, and it's Germany. Have you any wishes or observations regarding Germany?
Eine gute Frage.
Well, my honest view, I'm worried. I'm really worried about Germany. I have just followed the elections in the former eastern side of Germany, and I see how not only the Alternative für Deutschland has done a very good election, but to make bad thing even worse, also the Sarah Wagenknecht party has done so. If they have come up with around 30%, Sarah Wagenknecht party is around 15. And what is apparent in Germany now is that the way that they have handled the Alternative für Deutschland, that is by putting up a wall by all the other political parties to exclude them from power, is very difficult now when there are 2 parties with together around 45% of the population. And sadly, I see that parties seem to have no real problems to cooperate with Sarah Wagenknecht. I mean, her party is just as bad as we think the Alternative für Deutschland is. And the Alternative für Deutschland has, of course, had accepted the neo-Nazis' activities in the eastern part of Germany, which she has not. But it is a sad development, and of course there is only 1 year left until the elections for the whole of Germany, and no one knows how that will go. They also reduced their contributions to Ukraine, and there are some other things too that it makes me really worried. It's a problem to be Olaf Scholz. But now he has to be brave and do the right thing. I'll say that, nothing more.
Thank you. Ira?
Yes, maybe from the military point of view, I think Germany is doing a lot, actually, as we speak. You know, Germany is building up a brigade in Lithuania, 5,000 soldiers. That's a huge commitment. So they are actually contributing to Eastern Flank, NATO's Eastern Flank, a defense and deterrence posture. They're really thinking like what it means to be the logistics hub, quite like Sweden, you know, in the north, but in Central Europe. If in a case of crisis we need to transport troops, for instance, to the Eastern Flank countries, they are cooperating in maritime domain between Norway and Germany, for instance. They are, you know, working on the submarine field. So I think Germany is coming back, but it takes time to adapt this, you know, strategic culture for what it was during the Cold War years and post-Cold War years to the new realities. And I think they are on their way there militarily.
Sorry, there was this comment about Haga, which I think is a very, very important area. And I just mentioned when I heard an interview with Jens Stoltenberg on Swedish radio, and what he emphasized was hospitals. This was not what I expected, but it is true. It is really, really important.
Somebody always gets the last word, and that was the last word of these editions of Hanating at Hana Court. At this stage of a court, the question usually is, has the jury reached its verdict? We don't know, but what we do know is that we had a very fruitful discussion. Once again, thank you to each of you, panelists, and also the previous panelists. Thank you, everybody here in the audience, and thank you, Hanaholmen, for hosting this event. Stay tuned, there will be more of these. Thank you very much, have a good day.
Sorry?
I didn't have a chance to chat with
you.
No,
I saw you, and then I thought I'd go out, because I had looked both of you up on the computer.
Okay. Yes,
I can take.